The sight of the imposing human soldier triggers an unexpected biological response in the Orion females. As Lieutenant Peter Harris steps through the airlock, his heavily armored frame filling the entrance, Captain Sia's body betrays her. Fear courses through her veins, but with it comes an intense, primal arousal she can't control. Alarms blare throughout the celestial harmony, a cacophony of chaos matching the rapid beating of Sia's hearts. She grips the command console, steadying herself as the realization of their grave error sinks in. The science vessel has strayed into restricted human space near the contested Epsilon Eridani system, a mistake that could cost them everything. The human warship, UNS Thunderbolt, looms outside their viewports, a dark harbinger of the trouble to come. As the boarding party secures the bridge, Xia struggles to maintain her composure. Her skin flushes, sweat beading on her forehead as she faces the decorated human soldier. "Explain your presence in this sector," Lieutenant Harris demands, his voice a low growl that sends shivers down Xia's spine. She opens her mouth to respond, but her words catch in her throat. The pheromones released by her body in response to the fear are wreaking havoc on her system. Her legs tremble, threatening to give way beneath her. It was a navigation error," she manages, her voice quavering. "We meant no harm." Lieutenant Harris narrows his eyes, interpreting her flustered state as suspicious behavior. "Search the ship," he orders his team. "I want every deck, every compartment checked for weapons or spy tech." As the humans spread throughout the celestial harmony, the situation intensifies. The all-female Orion crew, each affected by the same biological response as their captain, struggle to maintain their professionalism. Their bodies betray them, releasing powerful pheromones that fill the air with an invisible cloud of attraction. In the aft section, a young Orion engineer named Lyra finds herself alone with a human soldier. Her fear spikes, triggering a surge of hormones that overwhelm her rational mind. Without warning, she reaches for the startled human, her fingers grasping at his armor. The soldier reacts instinctively, pushing her away and raising his weapon. "Lieutenant," he shouts, "we have a situation here." Lo. Harris rushes to the scene, his imposing figure filling the narrow corridor. He takes in the sight of the trembling Orion female, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something he can't quite identify. Captain Jia arrives moments later, her own condition worsening as she comes face to face with the human soldier once more. She places herself between Harris and Lyra, her breath coming in short gasps. "Please," she says, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's been a misunderstanding." But as she looks up into Lieutenant Harris's stern face, she realizes the true misunderstanding runs far deeper than a simple navigational error. The humans have no idea of the effect they're having on the Orion females, and the Orions are in no state to explain. With tensions at a breaking point and both species at a loss to understand the other's actions, the fate of the celestial harmony and its crew hangs in the balance. The air is thick with the potential for conflict, but also charged with an unexpected and powerful attraction that neither side fully comprehends. As the standoff on the bridge intensifies, Lieutenant Harris's keen military instincts kick in. He observes the Orion females closely, noting their unusual behavior. The trembling bodies, flushed skin, and dilated pupils don't align with typical fear responses he's encountered in combat situations. Furrowing his brow, Harris taps a command into his suit's integrated computer. "Initiate bioscans on all Orion crew members," he orders his team. The soldiers comply, activating handheld scanners that emit a soft blue glow as they pass over the aliens. Moments later, data streams across Harris's helmet display. His eyes widen as he processes the information. "Elevated hormone levels, unusual pheromone production," he mutters, confusion evident in his voice. Captain Xia, still struggling to maintain her composure, recognizes the dangerous misunderstanding unfolding before her. She takes a deep breath, willing her racing hearts to slow. "Lieutenant," she begins, her voice quavering, "I can explain." But her words come out disjointed and breathy, further fueling Lieutenant Harris's suspicions. He raises a hand, cutting her off. "Secure the Orion crew in the medical bay," he commands. "We need to examine them further." As the human soldiers escort the Orion females through the narrow corridors of the celestial harmony, the close proximity only intensifies their condition. Lyra, the young engineer, finds herself pressed against a burly human soldier as they navigate a tight turn. A soft, involuntary moan escapes her lips, causing the soldier to jerk away in surprise. Similar sounds begin to emanate from other Orion crew members, a chorus of confused arousal that echoes through the ship. The human soldiers exchange bewildered glances, their grips tightening on their weapons. Lieutenant Harris, bringing up the rear of the procession, feels a bead of sweat trickle down his neck despite his temperature-regulated armor. The situation is spiraling beyond his experience and training. He taps his comm unit, opening a channel to the UNS Thunderbolt. "This is Lieutenant Harris," he says, his voice tense. "We have an unusual situation here. Request immediate assistance from Xenobiology. Repeat, we need a xenobiologist on the Celestial Harmony ASAP." Within minutes, a shuttle docks with the Orion vessel. Dr. Marcus Scora, the Thunderbolt's lead xenobiologist, strides through the airlock, his keen eyes taking in the scene before him. He makes his way to the medical bay, where the Orion females are being held. As Dr. Scora examines the aliens, his expression shifts from curiosity to understanding. He turns to Lieutenant Harris, who stands rigid near the entrance. "Lieutenant," he says, his voice calm but urgent, "we have a delicate situation on our hands." The doctor explains the Orion's condition, describing it as a heat-like state triggered by fear. Their bodies are responding to the perceived threat with an intense mating drive, he elaborates. It's a survival mechanism, likely evolved to ensure the continuation of their species in times of extreme stress. Lieutenant Harris listens intently, his mind racing as he processes the implications. "Are they a threat?" he asks, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on his sidearm. Dr. Scora shakes his head emphatically. "No, quite the opposite. They're in an extremely vulnerable state. Mishandling this situation could lead to a serious diplomatic incident." The lieutenant's jaw clenches as he weighs his options. After a moment of tense silence, he nods. "Understood. I'll contact command for further instructions." A brief but intense discussion with his superiors follows. Finally, Lieutenant Harris makes his decision. "We'll isolate the Orion crew in their quarters," he announces. "I want a mixed team of guards and medical personnel monitoring them at all times." As the Orions are escorted to their quarters, Captain Zia finds her gaze drawn repeatedly to Lieutenant Harris. The imposing human's presence sends shivers down her spine, a mixture of fear and undeniable attraction coursing through her body. For his part, Lieutenant Harris struggles to maintain his professional demeanor. Now aware of the effect he's having on the alien captain, he avoids direct eye contact, his movements stiff and controlled. Once in her quarters, Captain Zia collapses onto her bed, her body trembling with unfulfilled need. She takes several deep breaths, trying to center herself. After a few moments, she manages to sit up, activating the ship's computer terminal. "Computer," she says, her voice hoarse, "access all available information on human biology and social customs." As the computer processes her request, Zia's mind races with questions. Why do these humans affect her so strongly? How can she navigate this situation without compromising her crew or her mission? Meanwhile, in the corridor outside, Lieutenant Harris confers with Dr. Scora. "How long will they be in this state?" he asks, keeping his voice low. The xenobiologist shrugs. "It's hard to say. Hours, maybe days. The important thing is to keep them calm and comfortable. Any additional stress could exacerbate their condition." Harris nods, his expression grim. "Understood. I'll have my team set up a rotation. We'll need to..." He's interrupted by a soft sound from behind one of the closed doors. It's a moan, unmistakably one of pleasure rather than pain. Both men stiffen, exchanging uncomfortable glances. "Right," Harris says, clearing his throat. "We'll, give them as much privacy as we can while maintaining security." As night falls on the celestial harmony, an uneasy quiet settles over the ship. In their quarters, the Orion females grapple with their intense biological urges. The human guards stand at their posts, acutely aware of the delicate nature of their assignment. In her cabin, Captain Shia pores over the information on her terminal. desperate to understand the confusing feelings she's experiencing. And in the ship's makeshift command center, Lieutenant Harris prepares for a long and potentially volatile night ahead, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The celestial harmony drifts in space, a crucible of tension and desire. As both species navigate this uncharted territory, the potential for conflict and unexpected connection looms large in the confined space of the Orion vessel. As the night cycle began on the celestial harmony, the tension aboard the vessel reached a fever pitch. Lieutenant Harris, acutely aware of the delicate situation, implemented a rotation system for his guards based on Dr. Skora's recommendations. He hoped this would minimize their exposure to the potent Orion pheromones, but it quickly became apparent that the plan had unforeseen complications. "Johnson, you're looking a bit flushed," Harris observed, eyeing one of his men critically. "Report back to the Thunderbolt for a medical evaluation?" The young soldier nodded, his eyes slightly glazed. "Yes, sir," he mumbled, stumbling slightly as he made his way to the airlock. Harris watched him go, a frown creasing his brow. More and more of his men were showing signs of being affected by the alien pheromones. He tapped his comm unit, opening a channel to Dr. Skora. "Doctor, we have a problem. My men are becoming compromised. I'm sending them back to the Thunderbolt, but we're going to be severely short-staffed soon." Skora's voice crackled over the comm, tinged with concern. "Understood, Lieutenant. I'm working on a potential solution, but it's going to take time. For now, limit all non-essential contact with the Orions." Harris acknowledged the order and set about reorganizing his remaining troops. The reduction in manpower meant he'd have to take on more responsibilities himself, a prospect that filled him with unease given his own growing struggle against the effects of the pheromones. Meanwhile, in her quarters, Captain Shia hunched over her computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keypad. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked, her body still thrumming with untenacity tension. She had been analyzing the chemical composition of the pheromones her species was emitting, hoping to develop a neutralizing agent. "Computer, run simulation Alpha 7, she commanded, her voice hoarse. The terminal hummed as it processed the request. Zia leaned back, massaging her temples. Her gaze drifted to the security feed, displaying Lieutenant Harris patrolling the corridors. A shiver ran through her at the sight of the human, her attraction to him growing stronger by the hour. Shaking her head to clear it, Zia refocused on her work. She was making progress, but she needed access to the ship's main laboratory to continue her research. Taking a deep breath, she opened a communication channel to Lieutenant Harris. "Lieutenant," she began, struggling to keep her voice steady, "I require access to our main lab. I believe I'm close to developing a solution to our situation." Harris's response was cautious but not dismissive. "I'll escort you there myself, Captain. Stand by." As Harris made his way to Shia's quarters, he encountered an unexpected complication. An Orion crew member had somehow managed to leave her assigned area and was wandering the corridor, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Ma'am, you need to return to your quarters," Harris said firmly, approaching the alien with caution. The Orion female's gaze snapped to him, and without warning she lunged forward, reaching for him with trembling hands. Harris reacted quickly, catching her wrists and holding her at arm's length. The alien whimpered, her body shaking with need. "I'm sorry," Harris said softly, maintaining his grip as he guided her back to her quarters. "We're doing everything we can to help you." Once the Orion was secured in her room, Harris input a command into his suit's computer, implementing a stricter lockdown on the alien crew's quarters. The incident had shaken him, driving home the gravity of their situation. Finally reaching Captain Zia's quarters, Harris steeled himself before entering. The Orion captain stood as he entered, her posture rigid, hands clasped tightly behind her back. "Are you ready, Captain?" Harris asked, his voice professional despite the charge in the air between them. Sheena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As they made their way to the laboratory, the close proximity between them intensified her condition. She could feel the heat radiating from Harris's body, smell the faint musk of his skin beneath the metallic scent of his armor. It took every ounce of her willpower not to reach out and touch him. For his part, Harris maintained a careful distance, acutely aware of the effect he was having on the alien captain. Yet he couldn't help but admire her tenacity and the intelligence shining in her eyes as she explained her research. As they entered the lab, neither of them noticed the subtle change in the ship's environment. The temperature was slowly rising, a malfunction in the environmental systems going undetected amidst the chaos of their current crisis. Xia immediately set to work, her fingers dancing across the lab's advanced equipment. Harris stood guard near the door, his eyes scanning between the corridor outside and the focused Orion captain. As minutes stretched into hours, the rising temperature began to take its toll. Sweat trickled down Harris's neck, his armor becoming uncomfortably warm. Xia's movements became less precise, her breathing more labored. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the ship, followed by the hiss of sealing doors. Harris rushed to the lab's entrance, only to find it locked tight. "What's happening?" Xia asked, alarm clear in her voice. Harris tapped at the door's control panel, his frown deepening. Some kind of automated protocol. We're sealed in. As the reality of their situation sank in, Harris and Xia exchanged a look of mingled concern and something deeper, more primal. Trapped together in the increasingly hot lab, surrounded by the potent Orion pheromones, both struggled to maintain their composure. Outside, Dr. Skora's voice crackled over the ship-wide comm system. "Attention all personnel. We're experiencing an environmental system malfunction. Please remain calm while we work to perseverance the issue." In the sealed lab, Harris and Xia faced each other, the air between them thick with tension and unwillpowered desire. As the temperature continued to rise, both human and Orion knew their control was slipping. The true test of their tenacity and the future of their species' relations hung in the balance, all within the confines of a malfunctioning starship floating in the vastness of space. Space. The increasing heat in the laboratory exacerbated the already tense atmosphere between Lieutenant Harris and Captain Xia. Harris, acutely aware of the rising temperature, made a swift decision. He reached for the collar of his uniform jacket, his fingers working quickly to unfasten the clasps. "It's getting too hot in here," he muttered, shrugging off the garment and draping it over a nearby chair. The removal of his outer layer revealed a form-fitting undershirt that clung to his muscular frame, now glistening with a fine sheen of sweat. Captain Xia's eyes widened, her gaze involuntarily drawn to the human's exposed skin. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to look away and focus on the task at hand. I think I'm close to a breakthrough," Xia said, her voice strained as she attempted to concentrate on the data scrolling across her screen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she input commands, the heat in her biology working against her usually steady hands. Harris moved closer, peering over her shoulder at the complex formulas and molecular structures displayed on the terminal. "What have you found?" he asked, his breath warm against her neck. Xia suppressed a shiver, her skin tingling where she could feel the heat radiating from Harris's body. "The neutralizing agent shows promise, but there's a flaw in its structure. It's unstable." She turned to face him, their proximity causing her heart to race. "To stabilize it, I need an enzyme found in human saliva." Harris blinked, processing her words. "Human saliva?" he repeated, his brow furrowing. Xia nodded, her eyes darting between his eyes and his lips. "Yes, it contains a unique enzyme that could act as a binding agent for the compound. Without it, the neutralizer will break down before it can take effect." For a moment, Harris stood motionless, weighing the implications of her request. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "If it's necessary, then we'll do it. How do you want to collect the sample?" Xia reached for his sterile collection tube with trembling hands. Just spit into this," she said, holding out the tube. Harris took the tube, his fingers brushing against hers in the process. The brief contact sent a jolt through both of them. He cleared his throat, focusing on the task at hand. Bringing the tube to his lips, he deposited a small amount of saliva into it before handing it back to Xia. As the Orion captain took the sample, their fingers touched again. This time the contact lingered, neither of them immediately pulling away. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an almost palpable energy. Xia's body reacted instinctively to the prolonged proximity, releasing a potent surge of pheromones. In the confined space of the laboratory, the effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Harris inhaled sharply, his pupils dilating as the pheromones hit his system. A wave of heat that had nothing to do with the malfunctioning environmental controls washed over him. His training screamed at him to maintain his composure, but he found himself swaying slightly, drawn towards Zia like a magnet. "Captain," he said, his voice husky, we need to focus on the task at hand." Zia nodded, her own breathing rapid and shallow. "Yes, of course," she managed, turning back to her workstation with the sample. She inserted the tube into an analysis device, her movements less precise than usual. As Zia worked to incorporate the human enzyme into her neutralizing agent, Harris paced the small confines of the lab, trying to clear his head. The combination of the rising heat and the Orion pheromones was making it increasingly difficult to think straight. Suddenly, a series of rapid beeps from the main console caught their attention. Harris moved to investigate, his eyes scanning the flashing warnings on the screen. "The environmental systems are completely haywire," he reported, his voice tense. "Temperatures still rising and—" He trailed off, his expression growing grim. "What is it?" Sia asked, looking up from her work. Harris met her gaze, his face hardened. "The doors have sealed. We're locked in." Before Zia could respond, Dr. Skora's voice crackled over the ship-wide comm system, confirming their fears about the environmental system malfunction. "Great," Harris muttered, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Just what we needed." Zia turned back to her work, redoubling her efforts. "I'm almost there," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "If I can just stabilize this compound." As she spoke, a power fluctuation caused the lab equipment to surge. The unstable mixture she had been working on began to emit a faint gas, mixing with the already pheromone-laden air. Harris noticed the change immediately, his senses heightened by the stress of their situation. "Captain, what's happening?" he asked, moving towards her workstation. Sia looked up, her eyes wide with alarm. "The compound, it's reacting with the pheromones in the air. This gas, it's amplifying the effects." The realization hit them both at the same time. Trapped in the sealed lab, with the temperature rising and now this potent gas filling the air, their situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Harris activated his emergency beacon, his movements slightly uncoordinated as the gas began to take effect. "This is Lieutenant Harris. We need immediate assistance in the main laboratory. The situation is—" He paused, fighting to maintain his focus. "Critical." Sia watched him, her own inhibitions rapidly fading under the influence of the gas. She could feel her control slipping, the primal urges of her biology growing stronger with each passing second. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to complete the neutralizing agent. It's our only chance to counteract these effects." Harris nodded, struggling to keep his gaze focused on her face rather than letting it wander. "What do you need me to do?" Sia gestured to the synthesizer. "The final step requires precise timing and a steady hand. In my current state, I don't trust myself to do it accurately." Understanding dawned on Harris's face. "You need my help to finish it." "Yes," Zia confirmed, her eyes locked with his. "Together, we might have a chance." Harris moved to join her at the workstation, acutely aware of how close their bodies were in the confined space. As they began to work on the final synthesis, their arms brushed against each other, each contact sending sparks of electricity through their overheated bodies. Despite the distractions, they managed to focus on the task at hand, their movements becoming a coordinated dance as they worked to complete the neutralizing agent. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching out as they fought against their own bodies' reactions. Just as they were nearing completion, a loud bang echoed through the laboratory, causing them both to jump. A storage unit, overpressurized by the rising heat, had ruptured, sending shards of glass and unknown chemicals scattering across the lab. Harris reacted on instinct, throwing his body in front of Zia to shield her from the debris. The sudden movement brought them into full contact, their faces mere inches apart as the chaos unfolded around them. For a moment, they stood frozen, gazing into each other's eyes. The world around them faded away, the blaring alarms and hiss of escaping gas receding into the background. In that instant, the barriers of species and duty seemed to dissolve, leaving only the raw, primal connection between them. The sound of the rescue team attempting to breach the sealed doors broke the spell. Harris and Gia separated reluctantly, both acutely aware of what had nearly transpired between them. As the effects of the newly synthesized neutralizing agent began to permeate the lab, gradually counteracting the pheromones and accidental gas, Harris and Gia exchanged a look of mingled relief and regret. The intensity of their shared experience hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. The laboratory doors finally slid open with a hiss, revealing Sergeant Fiona Martinez and her rescue team. "Lieutenant Harris, Captain Sia," Martinez called out, her voice muffled by her protective gear. "Are you all right?" Harris nodded, his voice rough as he replied, "We're fine, Sergeant. The situation is under control." As the rescue team ushered them out of the lab and towards separate medical bays for evaluation, Harris and Gia found their gazes drawn to each other. In that final look, volumes were spoken without a word, leaving the potential for further interactions hanging in the air between them. The immediate crisis had been averted, but as they parted ways, both the human lieutenant and the Orion captain knew that the repercussions of their time in the laboratory were a long way to go. The challenges that lay ahead, both personal and diplomatic, were only just beginning to unfold. The doors of the medical bay hissed shut behind Lieutenant Harris as he was ushered inside by the medical team. Through the closing gap, he caught a final glimpse of Captain Xia being led in the opposite direction. Their eyes met briefly, a silent exchange laden with unspoken emotions, before the doors sealed, cutting off their connection. "This way, Lieutenant," Dr. Scora's voice broke through Harris's momentary daze. The doctor guided him to an examination table, his expression a mixture of concern and professional curiosity. As Harris settled onto the table, he became acutely aware of the lingering effects of their ordeal. His skin tingled, his senses heightened to an almost uncomfortable degree. He could still smell the faint, intoxicating scent of Zia's pheromones clinging to his uniform. Dr. Scora began his examination, assisted by an Orion medical specialist, Dr. Lyra. Their movements were efficient and purposeful as they collected blood samples, ran scans, and monitored Harris's vital signs. "How are you feeling, Lieutenant?" Dr. Scora asked, his eyes fixed on a data pad displaying real-time results. Harris took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "I'm not sure. Everything feels intensified. Sounds, smells, even the texture of this examination table. And there's this pull, like a constant awareness of Cap." He trailed off, unsure how to describe the sensation. Dr. Lyra exchanged a glance with Dr. Scora. "The pull you're experiencing, is it directed towards Captain Xia?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. Harris nodded, feeling a flush creep up his neck. "Yes, it's as if I can sense her presence, even though she's not here." The doctor shared another look, this one filled with a mix of concern and fascination. Dr. Scora made a note on his pad before addressing Harris again. "We're going to run some additional tests. The combination of Orion pheromones, the neutralizing agent, and the accidental gas exposure seems to have had some unexpected effects." As the examination continued, Harris's mind drifted to the events in the laboratory. The intensity of their shared experience, the near miss with the exploding storage unit, the moment when time seemed to stand still as they gazed into each other's eyes. He shook his head, trying to clear the vivid memories. Meanwhile, in a separate medical bay, Captain Xia was undergoing a similar battery of tests. Dr. Lyra moved between the two patients, comparing notes and conferring with Dr. Scora in hushed tones. Hours passed as the medical team worked tirelessly to understand the full extent of the exposure's effects. Finally, Dr. Scora approached Harris, his expression grave. "Lieutenant, we've completed our initial evaluations," he began, his tone measured. "While the immediate crisis has been averted, both you and Captain Xia are showing signs of lingering physiological and hormonal imbalances. We're particularly concerned about an unexpected side effect of the neutralizing agent." Harris sat up straighter, his heart rate quickening. "What kind of side effect?" Dr. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes meeting Harris's with a mix of compassion and scientific intrigue. The agent appears to have created a heightened sensitivity between you and Captain Shia, specifically to each other's pheromones. This has resulted in a powerful biochemical bond. Harris's mind reeled as he processed the information. A bond? What exactly does that mean? Dr. Skora cleared his throat. It means, Lieutenant, that you and Captain Shia have developed an intense mutual attraction and an inexplicable ability to sense each other's emotions and physical state, even when separated. This goes beyond normal human or Orion biology. We're in uncharted territory here. As if to underscore the doctor's words, Harris felt a sudden wave of anxiety and curiosity wash over him. Somehow, he knew these feelings weren't his own. Shia, he whispered, understanding dawning on his face. Dr. Lyra nodded, confirming his unspoken realization. Yes, it seems you're experiencing Captain Shia's emotional state right now. We've decided to keep both of you under close observation. We'll be implementing a series of controlled interaction sessions to study the extent and nature of this newfound connection. Before Harris could respond, the medical bay doors slid open, revealing Commander Blackwell. His face was a mask of stern professionalism, but Harris could see the concern in his eyes. Doctor, I need a full report, Blackwell said, his voice tight. We've got a situation developing, and I need to know if Lieutenant Harris is fit for duty. Dr. Skora hesitated, glancing at Harris before responding. Commander, the situation is complex. While Lieutenant Harris is physically stable, there are complicating factors that... Blackwell held up a hand, cutting him off. I need Harris. We've uncovered evidence of a cyber attack that caused the Celestial Harmony's navigation error. It seems someone is trying to provoke a conflict between humans and Orions. And to top it all off, the Orion High Command is sending a diplomatic envoy. Ambassador Zorn will be arriving soon, and I need every capable officer on deck. Harris stood, ignoring the wave of dizziness that swept over him. I'm ready for duty, sir, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Blackwell studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good, because I'm assigning you as the official liaison to Ambassador Zorn. As the implications of this assignment sank in, Harris felt another surge of emotion that wasn't his own. A mixture of pride and apprehension. He knew without a doubt that Xia had just learned of her own new orders. The stage was set for a diplomatic dance unlike any in human or Orion history, with Harris and Xia at its center, bound by a connection neither fully understood. As Harris followed Commander Blackwell out of the medical bay, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental, with the fate of two species hanging in the balance. Balance. As Harris followed Commander Blackwell out of the medical bay, his mind raced with the implications of his new assignment and the lingering effects of his experience with Captain Xi. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Harris found himself thrust into the center of diplomatic preparations, his newly heightened senses both a blessing and a curse as he navigated the complex political landscape. Through it all, he remained acutely aware of Yia's presence, even when they were apart. It was during a strategy meeting with Commander Blackwell that everything changed. The commander's comm unit chimed, interrupting their discussion. His face grew grave as he listened to the message. Lieutenant, Blackwell said, his voice tight, we've uncovered new evidence. The cyber attack was more than just a navigation error. It's part of a larger plot to provoke conflict between humans and Orions. Harris felt a surge of alarm, both his own and an echo of Xia's. What are our orders, sir? We're sending you out on a covert mission. The UNS Shadow will depart immediately to investigate the source of the attack. You'll be joining Captain Xia, Sergeant Martinez, and a small crew. Within hours, Harris found himself aboard the sleek, stealth-capable vessel. As they prepared for departure, he couldn't help but notice how Xia's proximity intensified their connection. Her presence filled his senses, a constant undercurrent to his thoughts. The Shadow detached from the Thunderbolt with a faint shudder. As they left the Epsilon Eridani system behind, Harris felt the biochemical bond between himself and Xia grow stronger. It was as if the increasing distance from their home base had removed some unseen barrier. Lieutenant, Sergeant Martinez called from the pilot's seat, her voice cutting through his distraction. We're picking up a faint energy signature. It matches the frequency of the cyber attack. Harris moved to join her at the console, acutely aware of Xia doing the same. As they stood side by side, their arms nearly touching, he could feel the electricity crackling between them. "Can you trace it?" Xia asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil Harris could sense beneath the surface. Martinez nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. "It's coming from an abandoned space station orbiting a gas giant in a nearby system. Sending coordinates to navigation now." As they approached their destination, the station came into view. It was a massive structure, its once sleek lines now marred by years of neglect. Suddenly, warning klaxons blared throughout the shadow. "Automated defenses," Martinez shouted, her hands gripping the controls tightly. "Hang on!" The ship lurched as Martinez executed a series of complex evasive maneuvers. Harris and Xia were thrown against each other, their bodies pressing close as they struggled to maintain balance. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, amplifying their already heightened awareness of each other. As the immediate danger passed, Harris forced himself to focus on the mission. "We need to get inside that station," he said, his mind already formulating a plan. "Sergeant, can you provide a distraction while a small team infiltrates using the stealth shuttle?" Martinez grinned, a fierce light in her eyes. "Just give the word, sir." Harris turned to Xia, their eyes meeting in silent communication. "Captain, I'll need you with me. Your scientific expertise could be crucial." Xia nodded, her expression mirroring his purpose. "Agreed. Who else?" "Corporal Scora and Private Rodriguez," Harris decided. "They're our best for close-quarters combat." Within minutes, the team was assembled in the shuttle bay. As they boarded the small craft, Harris felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension coursing through him. He knew some of it was his own, but he could also sense Xia's emotions bleeding into his consciousness. The shuttle detached from the shadow, its stealth systems engaged. As Martinez began her attack run to draw the station's fire, Harris piloted the smaller craft towards a maintenance airlock. "Everyone ready?" he asked, his hand hovering over the docking controls. Xia placed her hand on his shoulder, the touch sending a shiver down his spine. "Let's do this," she said softly. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, the airlock opened, admitting them to the abandoned station. As they stepped inside, Harris and Xia exchanged a glance, both acutely aware that they were embarking on a mission that would test not only their skills, but also the limits of their unprecedented connection. The corridors stretched before them, dark and foreboding. Harris activated his tactical light, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal walls covered in a tangle of cables and defunct control panels. The air was stale, carrying the faint scent of ozone and decaying electronics. "Stay alert," Harris whispered, though he knew the warning was unnecessary. He could feel Xia's heightened awareness as if it were his own, their senses working in tandem to scan for threats. They hadn't gone far when the first obstacle presented itself. A security door, its locking mechanism glowing an ominous red, blocked their path. Xia stepped forward, her fingers dancing over the control panel with practiced ease. "It's an old system, but the encryption is complex," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. Harris felt a surge of admiration for her skills, followed immediately by a wave of answering pride from Xia. The feedback loop of their emotions threatened to distract him, but he forced himself to focus on their surroundings. A faint whirring sound caught his attention. "Everyone down!" he shouted, just as a laser burst from a hidden turret sliced through the air where they had been standing. Corporal Scora wasn't quite fast enough. The beam grazed his arm, leaving a smoking furrow in his combat suit. Private Rodriguez was at his side in an instant, applying a quick seal patch to the wound. "I'm fine," Scora gritted out, but Harris could see the pain in his eyes. "Rodriguez, get him back to the shuttle," Harris ordered. "Captain Xia and I will continue on." As the two soldiers retreated, Harris turned back to find Xia had already bypassed the door. She stood in the open doorway, her expression a mix of triumph and concern. "It's just us now," she said softly. Harris nodded, acutely aware of the implications. With just the two of them, there would be no buffer against the intensity of their connection. As they moved deeper into the station, he could feel their bond strengthening, their movements becoming more synchronized with each step. They encountered more malfunctioning robots and security systems as they progressed, but their heightened connection allowed them to navigate the hazards with uncanny precision. It was as if they could anticipate each other's thoughts, moving as one to avoid danger and overcome obstacles. Finally, they reached what appeared to be a central control room. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens flickering with ghostly light. Shia immediately moved to the main console, her fingers flying over the keys. "This is it," she breathed, "the source of the cyber attack. But there's more here than we expected." Harris leaned in, his chest brushing against her back as he peered at the screen. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, but they forced themselves to focus on the data scrolling before them. "It's a conspiracy," Harris said, his voice tight with shock. "Humans and Orions working together, trying to start a war between our species. But why?" Before Zia could answer, an alarm blared through the station. Red warning lights bathed the room in an eerie glow. "We've triggered some kind of failsafe," Jess said, her fingers working furiously to download as much data as possible. "We need to get out of here now." As they turned to leave, they found their path blocked. Standing in the doorway was a tall, imposing human with cold eyes and a scarred face. Beside him stood an Orion woman, her expression a mask of clinical detachment. "I'm afraid we can't let you leave with that information," the man said, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "I am Colonel Darius Vex, and this is my associate, Dr. Ilara. You've stumbled into something far bigger than you can imagine." Harris and Gia exchanged a glance, their bond thrumming with shared dedication. They knew without words that they would face this new threat together, their unprecedented connection, their greatest weapon in the fight to come. Uncover the truth and protect both their species. "I'm afraid your valiant efforts end here," Colonel Vex said, drawing a sleek energy pistol from his holster. "Dr. Ilara, if you would be so kind as to secure our guests." The Orion woman moved forward, her eyes fixed on Zia. Harris tensed, ready to defend his partner, but before either of them could act, a violent tremor shook the station. "What was that?" Dr. Ilara snapped, her composure slipping. Colonel Vex's eyes narrowed. "It seems your colleagues have decided to play rough," he said to Harris and Zia. "No matter. We have contingencies for this." Another explosion rocked the structure, closer this time. Harris felt Zia's surge of persistence and acted on it without hesitation. He lunged forward, tackling Colonel Vex as Zia simultaneously engaged Dr. Ilara. The fight was brief but intense. Harris and Zia moved with uncanny synchronization, their shared bond allowing them to anticipate and complement each other's actions. Within moments, they had subdued their opponents. "We need to move," Zia said, securing the unconscious forms of Vex and Ilara with quick ties. "The station won't hold together much longer." Harris nodded, grabbing the data drive Zia had prepared. They sprinted through the collapsing corridors, debris raining down around them. As they reached the airlock where they had entered, they found Sergeant Martinez waiting with the shuttle. "Cutting it a bit close, aren't you?" Martinez grinned, her relief evident as Harris and G boarded with their prisoners. The return journey to the Shadow was tense, with Harris and G working in tandem to keep their captives sedated while Martinez piloted through the chaos of the disintegrating station. As they docked with the Shadow and prepared for the jump back to Epsilon Eridani, Harris felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, mingled with Shia's own fatigue. The next few hours passed in a blur of debriefings and medical exams. Harris found himself growing increasingly disoriented, his senses overwhelmed by the constant influx of Zia's emotions and physical sensations. By the time they docked with the UNS Thunderbolt, he could barely distinguish his own thoughts from hers. "Lieutenant Harris, Captain Shia, I need you both to report to medical immediately," Commander Blackwell ordered as soon as they disembarked. His face was grim, concern evident in the set of his jaw. Harris opened his mouth to respond, but the world tilted suddenly. He felt Shia stumble beside him, her disorientation mirroring his own. Strong hands caught them both as their knees buckled. "Get them to quarantine now!" Blackwell's voice seemed to come from far away as darkness closed in around Harris's vision. He awoke to the sterile white of a medical bay, the hum of monitoring equipment filling the air. Harris tried to sit up, but his body felt leaden, unresponsive. "Easy, Lieutenant," Dr. Skora's voice came from nearby. "You've been through quite an ordeal." Harris turned his head with effort, seeing the doctor standing beside his bed. Beyond him, through a transparent partition, he could see Shia lying in an identical bed, her eyes closed. "What's happening to us?" Harris managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Dr. Skora's expression was troubled. "Your connection with Captain Shia has intensified beyond our initial projections. We're still analyzing the data, but it appears the bond is altering your genetic structure at an alarming rate." Harris processed this information, feeling a mixture of fear and fascination that he realized wasn't entirely his own. Zhao was awake, listening through his ears. "Commander Blackwell is in talks with the Orion delegation now," Dr. Skora continued. "The situation has become complicated." Over the next few days, Harris and Shia remained in quarantine, subjected to a battery of tests as the medical team struggled to understand and stabilize their condition. Through it all, their connection grew stronger, more vivid. Harris found himself experiencing flashes of Shia's memories. The cool touch of Orion rain on her skin, the taste of her favorite childhood meal, the pride she felt when earning her captain's insignia. These moments of connection were intoxicating, but they came at a cost. Each episode left them both physically drained, their vital signs fluctuating wildly. On the 5th day of their confinement, Commander Blackwell entered the medical bay, accompanied by a tall, regal Orion wearing the elaborate robes of a high-ranking diplomat. "Lieutenant Harris, Captain Shia," Blackwell said, his voice grave. "This is Ambassador Zorn of the Orion High Command. He has a proposal that may offer a solution to your situation." Ambassador Zorn stepped forward, his gaze moving between Harris and Shia. "What you are experiencing," he said, his voice rich and resonant, "is not entirely without precedent in Orion history. There are ancient rituals, long forgotten by most, that were once used to stabilize and strengthen bonds such as yours." Harris felt a spark of hope, tinged with Shia's cautious optimism. "What kind of ritual?" he asked. "A bonding ceremony," Zorn replied. "It is complex and not without risk, but it may be your best chance at survival and a unique opportunity for our peoples." As Zorn explained the details of the ritual, Harris felt a whirlwind of emotions, both his and Shia's. The idea was at once terrifying and exhilarating. To be bound even more closely to Shia, to potentially bridge the gap between their species in a way never before achieved. It was almost overwhelming to contemplate. "I'll give you time to consider," Blackwell said as Zorn concluded his explanation. "But I'm afraid we don't have the luxury of delay. Your condition is deteriorating rapidly. We'll need your decision within the hour." As Blackwell and Zorn left, Harris turned his head to meet Zia's gaze through the partition. No words were necessary. They both knew, with absolute certainty, what they had to do. An hour later, Harris found himself being wheeled through the corridors of the Orion diplomatic vessel, Shia by his side. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar incense, and the low hum of Orion chanting filled the air. As they approached the ceremonial chamber, Harris felt a surge of anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, he knew that he and Shia would face it together, their fates now irrevocably intertwined. The doors slid open, revealing a room bathed in ethereal blue light, and they crossed the threshold into the unknown. Unknown. As they crossed the threshold, Harris felt Shia's hand squeeze his, a gesture of reassurance that sent a wave of comfort through their shared connection. The chamber was unlike anything Harris had ever seen. Orion mystical symbols adorned the walls, their intricate patterns seeming to shift and dance in the ethereal blue light. Interspersed among these ancient markings were sleek panels of advanced human technology, their displays flickering with streams of data. A group of Orion's spiritual leaders stood on one side of the room, their robes adorned with shimmering symbols that matched those on the walls. Opposite them, a team of human scientists huddled around banks of equipment, their expressions a mix of anticipation and concern. Ambassador Zorn stepped forward, his voice resonating through the chamber. "Lieutenant Harris, Captain Shia, the ritual you are about to undertake is sacred and profound. It will test you in ways you cannot imagine, but it may be your only chance at survival and a unique opportunity for our peoples. Dr. Skora approached, his face etched with worry. We'll be monitoring you closely throughout the process. If at any point we detect dangerous levels of stress on your systems, we'll intervene immediately. Harris nodded, feeling a surge of dedication from Shia. They were ready. The first phase of the ritual began without warning. The floor beneath them shifted, revealing a complex series of obstacles. A ceremonial tether, glowing with an inner light, appeared between them. You must navigate this course together, one of the Orion leaders explained. Your movements must be as one. Harris and Xia exchanged a glance, their bond humming with shared focus. As they stepped onto the course, Harris felt Xia's presence in his mind grow stronger. He could sense her intentions before she moved, his body responding instinctively. They wove through the obstacles with fluid grace, their movements perfectly synchronized. Harris ducked as Xia leapt, their bodies flowing around each other in a dance of precision. The onlookers gasped as the pair cleared hurdles and navigated narrow paths with seemingly impossible coordination. As they completed the course, Harris heard murmurs of amazement from both humans and Orions alike. Dr. Skora's eyes were wide with wonder as he made notes on his datapad. The physical challenge complete, Harris and Xia were guided to two ornate chairs facing each other in the center of the chamber. A modified Orion MindLink device, its design altered to accommodate human physiology, was placed on their heads. This will deepen your connection, Dr. Lyra, an Orion scientist, explained. You will experience each other's memories and emotions with intense clarity. Are you prepared? Harris and Xia nodded in unison. As the device activated, Harris felt a surge of energy course through him. Suddenly, he was awash in a flood of memories. Xia's memories. He saw her childhood on an Orion colony world, felt her pride at joining the military, experienced her first encounter with humans through her eyes. Senna gasped, her eyes wide as she experienced Harris's life in turn. Their shared emotions swirled between them, creating a feedback loop of empathy and understanding. Without warning, classified military information began to surface in their shared consciousness. Harris saw schematics for advanced Orion defense systems, while Xia glimpsed details of human fleet deployments. Alarms blared from the monitoring equipment. We have a security breach, one of the human scientists shouted. Commander Blackwell and Ambassador Zorn conferred quickly, their expressions grave. After a tense moment, Blackwell nodded. Continue the ritual, he ordered. The potential benefits outweigh the risks. As the MindLink deepened, Dr. Skora and Dr. Lyra approached with hyposprays containing a shimmering blue liquid. This compound will stabilize the genetic changes occurring in your bodies, Dr. Lyra explained. It may cause some discomfort. As the compound was administered, Harris felt a wave of intense heat wash over him. His muscles spasmed, and his senses seemed to sharpen to an almost painful degree. Beside him, Xia trembled, her skin flushed. Through their bond, Harris could feel Xia's purpose to endure the pain. He focused on that shared dedication, using it to anchor himself as waves of sensation crashed over him. Suddenly, a surge of energy pulsed through their connection. The MindLink device sparked and sputtered, overloading from the intensity of their bond. The chamber's systems flickered, and a deep rumble shook the floor. The propulsion system is failing, an Orion crew member shouted from a nearby console. We're drifting towards an asteroid field. As chaos erupted around them, Harris became aware of a strange new sensation. The pain in his muscles was fading, replaced by a surge of strength. He saw a cut on Xia's arm, caused by a piece of falling debris close before his eyes. Dr. Skora stared at his readings in disbelief. Their cellular regeneration rates have increased exponentially, and their muscle density, it's off the charts. Before anyone could react to this new development, the ship lurched violently. Through the chamber's viewport, Harris could see the looming shapes of asteroids growing larger. Security teams, begin a full sweep of the vessel, Commander Blackwell ordered. We can't rule out sabotage. As the Orion crew raced to regain control of the ship and security teams mobilized, Harris and Xia stood, their new strength evident in their movements. They exchanged a look of shared purpose, their bond now stronger than ever. The ritual might be incomplete, but they were changed. As the asteroid field drew nearer and tensions rose around them, Harris knew that he and Zia would face whatever came next together. Their unprecedented union had created something entirely new, and its true potential was yet to be realized. Revealed. The genetic changes coursing through their bodies reached a crescendo, and Harris felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had experienced before. Beside him, Sia's eyes widened, her posture straightening as she too felt the transformation solidify within her. Their heightened senses immediately picked up on the chaos unfolding around them. The ship lurched violently, and through the viewport, Harris saw the looming shapes of asteroids growing ever larger. "Propulsion systems are offline," an Orion crew member shouted from a nearby console. "We're drifting into the asteroid field." Harris and Zia exchanged a glance, their newly stabilized bond humming with shared purpose. Without a word, they moved in perfect unison towards the exit, their movements fluid and precise. "Where are you going?" Commander Blackwell called after them. "To save the ship," Harris replied, his voice steady with newfound confidence. As they raced through the corridors, Harris felt Zia's scientific knowledge flooding his mind. He processed complex engineering concepts at an astonishing rate, formulating a plan even as they ran. They burst onto the bridge, startling the frantic crew. "We need manual control of the navigation systems," Harris announced, striding towards the helm. Captain Zia moved to a nearby engineering station, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm rerouting power from non-essential systems to the emergency thrusters," she explained, her voice calm despite the dire situation. An Orion officer looked at them skeptically. "With all due respect, how can you possibly—" His words were cut short as Harris took control of the helm, his movements preternaturally smooth. The ship responded to his touch with uncanny precision, weaving between two massive asteroids with mere meters to spare. "That's how," Zia said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Now we need to execute a series of short, controlled bursts to navigate through this field." As Harris guided the ship, Zia worked furiously to maintain power to the thrusters. The bridge crew watched in awe as the pair operated in perfect synchronization, their actions so coordinated it seemed as if they were of one mind. Suddenly, alarms blared across the bridge. "Unidentified vessel approaching rapidly," an officer called out. "Energy signature matches known cosmic equilibrium profiles." Commander Blackwell's face hardened. "They're taking advantage of our vulnerability," he growled. He tapped his comm badge. "Thunderbolt, this is Blackwell. We need immediate support to intercept an incoming hostile vessel." The response came back garbled with interference from the asteroid field. "Understood. Maneuvering to defensive posture, ETA. Minutes." Ambassador Zorn stepped forward, his expression grave. "Commander, I believe the situation calls for extraordinary measures." He turned to a nearby Orion officer. "Authorize use of the Zephyr protocol." The officer's eyes widened in surprise, but he nodded and quickly input a series of commands into his console. Moments later, a shimmering field of energy coalesced in the center of the bridge, resolving into the forms of Sergeant Martinez, Orion engineer Kala, and several other specialists. Harris barely had time to process the implications of this previously unknown teleportation technology before a violent impact rocked the ship. The pursuing cosmic equilibrium vessel had opened fire, their long-range disruptors slamming into the Orion ship's already compromised shields. "Evasive maneuvers," Blackwell ordered, but Harris was already reacting, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to anticipate and counter each incoming attack. As Harris wove the ship through an increasingly dense field of asteroids, using the massive rocks as cover from enemy fire, Zia worked with the newly arrived engineering team to stabilize the failing power grid. "We need more power to the thrusters," Harris called out, his hands dancing across the controls as he executed a particularly daring maneuver. Zia's mind raced, seeking a solution. Suddenly she felt a strange tingling sensation coursing through her body. Without fully understanding how, she reached out with her mind, projecting a shimmering energy field around the ship. The field deflected a smaller asteroid that would have struck the hull, but Zia gasped at the effort, nearly collapsing. Harris felt her strain through their bond and instinctively shared his strength, helping her maintain the field. "What was that?" Blackwell demanded, staring at the fading energy shimmer. "A new ability," Zia panted, straightening up. "But it's taxing to use. We can't rely on it for long." As they neared the edge of the asteroid field, the situation grew increasingly desperate. The pursuing ship intensified its assault, while the Orion vessel systems groaned under the continued strain. Shaya's eyes suddenly lit up with inspiration. "The teleportation device," she said, turning to Ambassador Zorn. "Could it transport a team onto the enemy ship?" Zorn hesitated for a moment before nodding. "It's possible, but extremely risky." "We'll go," Harris said immediately, feeling Sia's agreement through their bond. Blackwell looked between them, weighing the dangers against their dire situation. Finally, he nodded. "Assemble a strike team. You leave in 5 minutes." As Harris and Zia prepared for the mission, joined by 2 Orion security specialists, the gravity of their situation settled over them. They were about to teleport onto an enemy vessel, their bodies still adjusting to their evolved state, with the fate of both ships hanging in the balance. Harris met Sia's eyes, feeling her willpower and tenacity matching his own. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the teleportation device powered up, Harris took a deep breath, ready to confront the cosmic equilibrium extremists and protect the fragile peace between their peoples. The air around them began to shimmer as the device activated, the bridge of the Orion ship fading from view. Their mission, and the next chapter of their journey, was about to begin. The shimmering energy enveloped them, and in an instant, the familiar surroundings of the Orion ship vanished, replaced by the stark interior of the cosmic equilibrium vessel. Harris blinked, his enhanced senses immediately cataloging their new environment. The strike team had materialized in a narrow corridor, its metallic walls lined with pulsing circuitry. The air carried a faint ozone smell, tinged with something acrid that made his nose wrinkle. Beside him, Zia tensed, her eyes scanning for threats. The 2 Orion security specialists, Vex and Lyra, flanked them, weapons at the ready. For a moment, silence reigned. Then chaos erupted. 2 cosmic equilibrium crew members rounded the corner, their eyes widening in shock at the sudden appearance of intruders. Harris and Shia moved as one, their newly heightened reflexes propelling them forward with inhuman speed. Harris ducked under a wild swing from the first attacker, using the man's momentum to flip him over his shoulder. Simultaneously, Zia executed a precise strike to the second crew member's solar plexus, leaving him gasping for air. As the extremist crumpled to the floor, Harris felt a surge of exhilaration course through him. He glanced at Zia, seeing his own amazement mirrored in her eyes. Their movements had been perfectly synchronized, as if they'd trained together for years. "Impressive," Vex murmured, securing the incapacitated crew members with quick efficiency. Lyra nodded in agreement, her antennae twitching with curiosity. "Your bond seems to have enhanced your combat capabilities significantly." Before Harris could respond, a sudden pulse of something flashed through his mind. It wasn't a thought exactly, but a crystal-clear image of the ship's layout, with a bright point indicating their current location. "Did you see that?" he asked Zia, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes wide. I think I sent it to you, somehow." Harris took a deep breath, marveling at this new development. They could communicate telepathically. The tactical advantages this offered were immense. "We need to move," he said aloud, gesturing for Vex and Lyra to follow. "The bridge is 3 decks up, and we don't have much time before they realize we're here." As they made their way through the ship's winding corridors, Harris and Shia fell into a seamless rhythm. They moved as a single unit, covering each other's blind spots and anticipating threats before they materialized. Vex and Lyra, initially skeptical of the human-Orion hybrid experiment, watched in awe as the pair effortlessly neutralized every obstacle in their path. Harris's mind raced, processing information at an unprecedented speed. He could feel Sia's thoughts brushing against his own, a constant stream of tactical data and emotional feedback. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. As they approached a heavily fortified security checkpoint, Harris felt a spike of alarm from Sia. Through their bond, he saw what she had noticed, a subtle shift in the air currents, indicating hidden defense turrets. Without a word, Harris and Shia raised their hands in unison. A shimmering energy field sprang to life around them, just as plasma bolts erupted from concealed compartments in the walls. The deadly energy dissipated harmlessly against their protective barrier. Vex and Lyra, caught off guard by the sudden attack, quickly took cover behind the human-Orion pair. "By the celestial harmony," Lyra breathed, her voice tinged with awe and a hint of fear. "What are you two becoming?" There was no time to ponder the question. Harris and Zia pressed forward, their shared energy field deflecting the barrage of plasma fire. As they reached the checkpoint, Harris felt a surge of strength flow through him. With a single powerful kick, he shattered the reinforced door, sending it flying inward. The strike team burst onto the bridge, catching the cosmic equilibrium leadership completely off guard. At the center of the command platform stood a tall, imposing human with steely gray hair, Admiral Thorn. Beside him, an Orion woman with striking violet eyes could only be Dr. Zara. "How did you—" Thorn began, his hand reaching for a weapon, but Harris and Gia were already in motion. They moved with inhuman speed and grace, disarming the bridge crew before they could mount a proper defense. In a matter of seconds, the strike team had control of the ship. As Vex and Lyra secured the prisoners, Dr. Zara's eyes remained fixed on Harris and Sia. Her expression was a mixture of fear and fascination. "Extraordinary," she murmured, even as Lyra bound her hands. "You've exceeded our wildest expectations." Harris felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Zara's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You think this was just about inciting war?" "No, Lieutenant Harris. We sought to study and replicate the effects of human-Orion hybridization, and you two, you're the key to creating a superior species." The revelation hit Harris like a physical blow. He turned to Sia, seeing his own shock and confusion reflected in her eyes. Their bond, their new abilities, had it all been part of some grand experiment? Before he could process this new information, an alarm blared throughout the ship. Admiral Thorn, taking advantage of their momentary distraction, had managed to activate some kind of fail-safe protocol. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," a computerized voice announced. 5 minutes to core overload." Harris snapped back to attention, pushing aside the swirling questions and emotions. There would be time to unravel the implications of Dr. Zara's words later. Right now, they had a ship to save and prisoners to secure. He locked eyes with Shia, feeling the strength of their bond surge between them. Whatever they had become, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. With a shared knot of drive, they turned to the ship's main console, ready to avert disaster and complete their mission. As Harris's fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls, he felt Zia's knowledge flowing into his mind, guiding his actions. The countdown continued, each second bringing them closer to potential catastrophe. But with their combined skills and their newfound connection, Harris knew they stood a chance. The real test of their abilities and the true nature of their bond was only just beginning. The air around them crackled with energy as the teleportation device completed its cycle, depositing Harris, Zia, and their team back onto the bridge of the UN's Thunderbolt. Commander Blackwell strode forward, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "Report, Lieutenant." Harris opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The adrenaline of the mission was fading, replaced by a surge of conflicting sensations. He felt simultaneously drained and electrified, his skin tingling where it brushed against Sia's. Their eyes met, and a jolt of awareness passed between them. She cleared her throat, stepping forward. "Mission accomplished, Commander. The cosmic equilibrium vessel has been secured, and we've taken key personnel into custody." Blackwell nodded, his sharp gaze moving between the two of them. "Excellent work, but I can see we have some unexpected developments to address." Before Harris could respond, Dr. Skora appeared at his side, medical scanner in hand. "Commander, I need to run a full diagnostic on Lieutenant Harris and Captain Shia immediately. Their physiological readings are off the charts." Agreed, Blackwell said. Report to Medical Bay for a full workup. We'll debrief once you've been cleared. As Harris and Zia were led away, Harris felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He stumbled, reaching out instinctively. Zia caught his arm, steadying him. The moment their skin made contact, a visible spark of energy crackled between them. Dr. Skora's eyes widened. Fascinating, she murmured, her scanner beeping rapidly. We need to get them to the quarantine unit. Now! The next few hours passed in a blur of medical tests and increasingly concerned discussions between Dr. Skora and her Orion counterpart, Dr. Lyra. Harris and Zia found themselves separated by a transparent barrier, each confined to one half of a specially designed quarantine chamber. Your cellular structure is continuing to evolve at an accelerated rate, Dr. Skora explained, her voice tinged with a mix of scientific excitement and medical concern. The bond between you seems to be intensifying, affecting your bodies on a molecular level. Harris pressed a hand against the barrier, feeling an almost magnetic pull toward Zia. She mirrored his action, their palms separated by mere inches of transparent material. Even through the barrier, he could feel the heat of her skin, the pulse of her energy. What's happening to us? Zia asked, her voice strained. Dr. Lyra stepped forward, her antennae twitching with agitation. Your bodies are producing an unprecedented combination of human and Orion pheromones. The biochemical reaction is potent. Harris swallowed hard, fighting the urge to tear down the barrier between them. How do we control it? For now, distance is our best option, Dr. Skora said. We need time to study the full extent of your connection and develop a way to manage these intense physical responses. As the doctors continued their analysis, Harris felt a sudden influx of information flooding his mind. Complex Orion mathematical equations, snippets of ancient history, tactical maneuvers he'd never studied, all poured into his consciousness. He gasped, looking up to see Zhou wearing an expression of equal wonder and confusion. I can see what you're thinking, she whispered, her eyes wide. I know things I've never learned. Before they could explore this new development further, Commander Blackwell entered the quarantine unit, his face grim. We have a situation, he announced. The intel team has uncovered some disturbing information about the cosmic equilibrium's activities. As Blackwell briefed them on the discovery of the secret experiments and the hybrid captives, Harris felt a surge of purpose coursing through him. Despite the strange changes overtaking his body and mind, his sense of duty remained unwavering. We need to rescue those people, he said, locking eyes with Shia. She nodded, her dedication matching his own. Blackwell studied them for a moment before turning to the medical team. Can they be ready for a mission? Dr. Skora hesitated. It's risky, Commander. Their condition is still highly unstable. But their abilities could be crucial to the mission's success, Dr. Lyra interjected. Perhaps we could develop a temporary suppressant to help them maintain control during the operation. As the medical team debated the possibilities, Harris felt a new connection forming with Shia. Without words, they shared their persistence to see this mission through, to use their evolving abilities for the greater good. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Harris and Shia underwent intensive testing as Dr. Skora and Dr. Lyra worked to create a suppressant that could temper their intense biological responses without dampening their enhanced abilities. Meanwhile, they absorbed vast amounts of information from each other, their minds melding in ways that defied conventional understanding. Finally, the day of the mission arrived. As Harris donned the specially designed environmental suit, he felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The suppressant coursed through his veins, dulling the overwhelming pull toward Zia, but leaving his enhanced senses intact. He stepped into the hangar bay, where the rest of the rescue team was assembling. Zia appeared moments later, her eyes meeting his through the protective visor of her suit. Even with the suppressant, he could feel the energy humming between them. Commander Blackwell addressed the team, his voice filled with quiet intensity. This mission is critical, not just for the lives at stake, but for the future of human-Orion relations. You're the best we have. Make us proud. As they boarded the modified stealth vessel, Harris took his position at the front of the team, Zia at his side. The ship's engines hummed to life, preparing to launch into the unknown. Whatever challenges lay ahead on that volatile, corrosive planet, whatever secrets they might uncover about their own evolving nature, Harris knew one thing for certain: he and Xia would face it together. The hangar bay doors slid open, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. With a surge of power, the stealth vessel shot forward, carrying its determined crew toward a destination that would test the limits of their abilities and the strength of their newfound bond. The stealth vessel streaked through the void, its sleek form barely visible against the backdrop of stars. Inside, Harris and Xia sat side by side, their environmental suits humming softly as they prepared for the challenges ahead. As they approached the volatile planet, the ship's sensors lit up with warnings. Intense electromagnetic storms raged across the surface, creating a swirling tapestry of energy visible even from orbit. "Atmospheric entry in 30 seconds, announced the pilot, her voice tense. "Brace for turbulence." Harris felt Xia's hand brush against his, a spark of energy passing between them even through their suits. He turned to meet her gaze, seeing his own mix of dedication and apprehension reflected in her eyes. The ship shuddered as it plunged into the corrosive atmosphere. Alarms blared as the hull strained against the caustic elements. Harris gripped his seat, his enhanced senses picking up every creak and groan of the vessel's structure. Suddenly, a cacophony of sounds assaulted Harris's ears. He winced, realizing the suppressant was having an unexpected effect on his auditory perception. Every minute vibration of the ship's hull echoed in his mind with startling clarity. "Harris?" Xia's voice cut through the noise. "What's wrong?" He shook his head, trying to focus. "My hearing, it's intensified. I can hear everything." Xia's eyes widened. "I'm experiencing something similar with my vision. I can see thermal signatures through the viewports." Before they could discuss further, the pilot's voice rang out. "Prepare for landing. We found a sheltered canyon to set down." The ship touched down with a gentle thud. As the team disembarked, they activated their suits' protective fields, creating shimmering barriers against the corrosive atmosphere. Harris took point, his heightened hearing allowing him to detect the slightest disturbances in the air. Xia followed close behind, her enhanced vision scanning the treacherous terrain for hidden dangers. As they navigated the hostile landscape, Harris stopped abruptly. "Hold up," he whispered, gesturing ahead. "There's something blocking our path." Xia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the obstruction. "It's a field of crystalline formations," she reported, "likely created by the corrosive atmosphere. They're razor-sharp and unstable." Harris's mind raced, combining his tactical experience with the scientific knowledge he'd absorbed from Xia. "We can use controlled detonations to clear a path," he suggested. "If we calibrate them carefully, we can avoid triggering any seismic activity that might alert the facility." The team set to work, placing charges with precision. As Sergeant Martinez moved to set the final charge, he paused, his hand hovering over an unusual rock formation. "Captain Xia," he called out, "you might want to take a look at this." Xia approached, her enhanced vision immediately detecting the hidden circuitry within the formation. "It's a camouflage sensor array," she said, her voice low, "part of the facility's early warning system." With quick, decisive movements, Xia disabled the array before it could transmit an alert. The team exchanged grim looks, aware that more hidden defenses likely lay ahead. They detonated the charges in sequence, the carefully controlled explosions carving a path through the crystalline field. As they moved forward, Harris's enhanced hearing picked up a faint scraping sound. "Over here," he called, moving towards the source of the noise. The team gathered around a series of deep scratch marks in the rocky ground. Xia knelt, her fingers hovering above the marks. "These were made by something with incredible strength," she observed. "Someone or something was dragged towards the facility." The physical evidence of the captive's mistreatment sent a ripple of tension through the team. Harris felt a surge of commitment flow through his bond with Xia, their shared persistence to complete the mission stronger than ever. As they approached the outer perimeter of the research facility, Harris and Xia's telepathic bond intensified. Images and sensations flowed between them, allowing them to coordinate their movements with unprecedented precision. They worked in silent tandem to bypass the facility's outer defenses, disabling motion sensors, avoiding plasma turrets, and finding weak points in energy barriers. Their enhanced abilities, combined with their shared knowledge, made them a formidable team. Finally, they reached the facility's main entrance. A massive security door loomed before them, its surface etched with intricate locking mechanisms. Xia stepped forward, her fingers dancing across the door's control panel. Harris stood beside her, his mind merging with hers as they combined their knowledge of Orion technology and human military encryption. With a hiss of hydraulics, the massive door slid open. A wave of stale, recycled air washed over them, carrying a complex mix of human and Orion pheromones. "We're in," Harris announced, his voice tight with anticipation. "Let's move." The team split into two groups, Harris leading one towards the holding cells while Xia headed for the research labs. As they moved deeper into the complex, signs of a hasty evacuation became apparent. Abandoned workstations and scattered equipment spoke of a sudden departure. Harris's team reached the holding cells, and the sight that greeted them was both fascinating and disturbing. The hybrid captives, displaying a mix of human and Orion characteristics, reacted with a range of emotions, from fear to aggression. As Harris began the delicate process of freeing the captives, he felt a surge of empathy. These beings, caught between two worlds, represented the potential consequences of his and Xia's own evolving nature. Meanwhile, Xia's team reached the main research laboratory. Banks of computers hummed with activity, their screens displaying complex data on the experiments conducted by the cosmic equilibrium. As Xia began downloading and encrypting the information, her eyes widened at a startling discovery. The data revealed the true extent of the cosmic equilibrium's ambitions. They sought to weaponize the human-Orion bond, creating hybrid soldiers with unprecedented combat abilities. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the complex. Security doors began to seal, threatening to trap them inside. "Xia!" Harris's voice echoed in her mind. "We need to move. Now!" Their bond stretched to its limits. Harris and Xia coordinated a frantic evacuation plan. They faced the daunting task of leading their team, the freed hybrid captives, and the crucial research data back to their extraction point through the hazardous planet surface. As they reached the facility's exit, the corrosive atmosphere swirling beyond, Harris and Xia exchanged a determined look. The true test of their abilities and the strength of their bond was only beginning. The true test of their abilities and the strength of their bond was only just starting. As they stepped out into the corrosive atmosphere, alarms blared throughout the facility. Harris's enhanced hearing picked up a low-frequency rumble beneath their feet, distinct from the shrieking sirens. "Xia," he called out, his voice tight with urgency. "The planet's becoming unstable. Those controlled detonations must have triggered some tectonic activity." Xia nodded, her eyes scanning the complex layout of the facility. "I can see a path through the closing security door," she said, her enhanced vision penetrating the walls. "This way!" They moved swiftly, Xia guiding the team through a labyrinth of corridors. Harris noticed the hybrid captives responding to their presence, becoming more docile and cooperative as they moved. "They're reacting to our pheromones," Xia observed, her scientific mind racing even in the midst of crisis. As they navigated the facility, Harris caught glimpses of cosmic equilibrium security forces converging on their position. Xia's ability to see through walls proved invaluable, allowing them to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. They burst into the hangar bay, greeted by the sight of several advanced shuttles designed to withstand the planet's harsh environment. Harris's mind merged with Xia's, their shared knowledge allowing him to quickly familiarize himself with the shuttle controls. "Martinez, take half the captives and the research data in the first shuttle," Harris ordered. "We'll follow with the rest." As they began loading the shuttles, the facility's defense systems roared to life. Automated turrets emerged from hidden compartments, spitting high-energy plasma bolts at the team. Harris and Xia moved in perfect synchronization, their bond allowing for flawless coordination. They provided cover fire, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to anticipate and counter each attack. The planet trembled beneath them, the seismic activity intensifying. Large cracks spiderwebbed across the hangar bay floor, threatening to swallow the shuttle's whole. "We need to go now," Harris shouted, making a split-second decision. "Martinez, launch immediately." The first shuttle took off, carrying half of the hybrid captives and the precious research data. Harris and Zia worked frantically to load the remaining captives onto the second shuttle. A violent tremor shook the facility, causing a massive support beam to collapse. It crashed down, blocking the path of the last group of hybrids. Without hesitation, Harris rushed forward, his muscles straining as he lifted the beam. "Go," he grunted to the captives, who quickly scrambled past. As Harris held the beam, he inadvertently inhaled a large amount of the corrosive atmosphere. Pain seared through his lungs and he stumbled, gasping for breath. Shell was at his side in an instant, her arm wrapping around his waist as she half-carried him to the shuttle. "I've got you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear pulsing through their bond. They made it into the shuttle just as the hangar bay began to collapse around them. She took control, her enhanced vision piercing through the thickening toxic clouds and electromagnetic interference as she piloted them out of the atmosphere. As they broke free of the planet's gravitational pull, they witnessed the research facility crumbling into a massive sinkhole, erasing the last physical evidence of the cosmic equilibrium's experiments. The two shuttles rendezvoused with their stealth vessel, which had been orbiting the planet. Once aboard, Dr. Skora and Dr. Lyra immediately rushed to Harris's side. "His respiratory system has sustained significant damage," Dr. Skora reported, her face grim as she examined Harris. Dr. Lyra's eyes lit up with a sudden idea. "A transfusion of Zia's blood might accelerate his healing," she suggested. "Their unique bond has altered their physiology. It could work." Zia nodded without hesitation, already rolling up her sleeve. "Do it," she said firmly. As the doctors prepared for the procedure, Sergeant Ethan Reeves began analyzing the retrieved data. His eyes widened as he uncovered information about a hidden cosmic equilibrium base. "Captain," he called out to Zia, "you need to see this. It looks like the weaponization program was just the beginning." She, torn between her concern for Harris and her duty, moved to examine the data. As she processed the implications, the ship's long-range sensors began to flash warnings. "Multiple unidentified ships converging on the UNS Thunderbolt's position," the pilot announced, her voice tense. Shaka's mind raced, connecting the dots. The cosmic equilibrium's influence clearly extended further than they had initially believed. They were racing not just against time to save Harris, but against an enemy whose reach they were only beginning to understand. As Dr. Skora began the blood transfusion, Ja returned to Harris's side, taking his hand in hers. Through their bond, she could feel his pain, his drive, and beneath it all, a growing connection that defied explanation. The stealth vessel accelerated towards the Epsilon Eridani system, carrying its cargo of injured comrades, unstable hybrid captives, and vital intelligence. As they approached the UNS Thunderbolt, Zia knew that the success of their mission had opened up new possibilities for human-Orion cooperation, but it had also unleashed potential new threats and deepened the mystery surrounding the cosmic equilibrium's true intentions. Harris's eyes fluttered open, meeting Zia's gaze. Despite his weakened state, she could see the grit burning in his eyes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Together. Their shared commitment burned bright, a beacon of hope in the face of mounting challenges. As they approached the Epsilon Eridani system, Harris's condition took a drastic turn for the worse. His breathing became labored, each intake of air a painful struggle. Zia, her face etched with concern, made a swift decision. "We need to start the transfusion now," she ordered, her voice sharp with urgency. Dr. Skora and Dr. Lyra sprang into action, quickly setting up a makeshift transfusion unit. They connected Harris and Zia's circulatory systems, the tubes a physical manifestation of their already potent bond. As Zia's altered blood flowed into Harris, a jolt of energy surged through both of them. Harris's eyes flew open, his back arching as he gasped for air. Zia gripped the edge of her chair, her fingers tightening as she experienced a rush of sensations. "It's working," Dr. Lyra murmured, her eyes fixed on the monitors. "His vitals are stabilizing." The transfusion amplified their connection to an unprecedented degree. Vivid images flashed through their minds. Glimpses of childhoods on different worlds, the adrenaline rush of combat, the wonder of first contact. Emotions flowed between them like a raging river, raw and unfiltered. Their shared experience was cut short by a commotion from the cargo hold. Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with tension. "Captain, we have a situation. The hybrids are becoming violent. We can't contain them much longer." She tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. The transfusion had weakened her more than she'd anticipated. Harris, his strength returning, caught her arm. "I've got this," he said, his voice still rough but growing stronger by the second. He made his way to the cargo hold, where chaos reigned. Several hybrid captives thrashed against their restraints, their eyes wild with fear and aggression. Sergeant Martinez and her team fired stun blasts, trying to subdue the most volatile individuals. Harris stepped forward, his newly enhanced senses overwhelmed by the maelstrom of pheromones and emotions. He closed his eyes, drawing on his connection with Shia to center himself. "Stand down," he commanded, his voice cutting through the cacophony. To everyone's surprise, the hybrids responded, their frenzied movements slowing. Harris's altered physiology was emitting calming pheromones, a side effect of the transfusion that no one had anticipated. The moment of respite was short-lived. The ship's alarms blared, and the pilot's voice rang out. "Multiple hostiles detected. Cosmic equilibrium ships incoming." Harris rushed to the bridge, where he found Zia already poring over tactical displays. 5 enemy vessels had emerged from behind a nearby moon, forming a blockade between them and the UNS Thunderbolt. "Foster," Harris called to the pilot, "what's our status?" Jack Foster, his hands dancing over the controls, responded without taking his eyes off the view screen. "Stealth systems are operational, but they're using some kind of advanced sensors. They can track our heat signature." Sergeant Ethan Reeves burst onto the bridge, his face flushed with excitement. "I've found something in the data we retrieved. Their ships are using a new shielding technology derived from the hybrid experiments." As Reeves explained his findings, the ship rocked under enemy fire. Foster executed a series of evasive maneuvers, but the cosmic equilibrium ships matched them move for move. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness swept through the bridge. The air grew thick with an unfamiliar scent, sweet and musky. Harris realized with a start that it was coming from the cargo hold. The hybrid captives were releasing a potent burst of pheromones. The effect on the crew was immediate and dramatic. Human crew members felt a surge of adrenaline, their movements becoming quicker, more precise. The Orions, including Yi, entered a state similar to their heat cycle, their skin flushing and their pupils dilating. Harris, his body still adjusting to the transfusion, found himself uniquely positioned to resist the worst of the pheromones' effects. He took command, his mind racing to formulate a plan. "Foster, on my mark, I want you to fly directly at the lead enemy vessel," he ordered. Foster's eyes widened. "Sir, that's suicide." "Trust me," Harris said, his gaze locked with Shia's. Through their bond, he shared his plan, drawing on their combined knowledge and instincts. As Foster maneuvered the ship into position, Harris directed a series of precise adjustments to their shields and weapons. He was creating a resonance frequency, exploiting a weakness in the enemy's new shielding technology. "Now," Harris shouted. Foster plunged the ship forward, straight at the heart of the enemy formation. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed they would collide. Then at the last second, the enemy ship's shields flickered and failed. "Thunderbolt, fire now!" Shia commanded. A barrage of fire from the UNS Thunderbolt's fighters struck the vulnerable enemy ship, causing a chain reaction that disrupted the entire blockade. As they broke through, a stray shot clipped their ship, causing a hull breach in the cargo hold. Warning klaxons blared as the automated systems struggled to contain the damage. Without a word, Harris and Zia moved in perfect sync. Still connected by the transfusion equipment, they made their way to the breach. Their enhanced strength and flawless coordination allowed them to maneuver a heavy bulkhead into place, sealing the rupture. The effort left them gasping, their bodies pushed to the limit. As they leaned against each other, catching their breath, they felt the ship dock with the UNS Thunderbolt. But their ordeal was not nearly finished. Through the viewports, they could see the surviving cosmic equilibrium ships regrouping, preparing for another attack. And aboard the Thunderbolt, chaos was spreading as the pheromone-induced frenzy took hold. Harris and Xia exchanged a look, their bond humming with shared dedication. They had won this battle, but the war was just beginning. As the medical team rushed in, struggling against the effects of the pheromones, Harris and Xia steeled themselves for the challenges ahead. The fate of two species and the delicate balance of interstellar relations rested in their hands. Their shared tenacity would be tested to its limits in the coming hours. As Harris and Xia disengaged from the transfusion equipment, the ship shuddered under another barrage from the regrouping cosmic equilibrium forces. Alarms blared, signaling multiple hull breaches and systems failures. "We need to get to the bridge," Harris said, his voice hoarse but determined. They made their way through the corridors, navigating around panicked crew members and sparking electrical panels. The air grew thick with an overpowering, sweet, musky scent. The pheromones from the hybrid captives were spreading rapidly through the ship's ventilation system. On the bridge, they found Commander Blackwell struggling to maintain order. Crew members moved erratically, their movements alternating between sluggish and hyperactive as the pheromones affected their systems. "Status report," Xia demanded, her enhanced physiology allowing her to resist the worst of the pheromone effects. "Multiple systems compromised," Blackwell replied, his face flushed and sweating. "Weapons are at 60% capacity, shields failing, and we've got reports of the hybrids breaking containment." Harris closed his eyes, focusing on the tactical data streaming through his mind. His newly enhanced cognitive abilities allowed him to process the information at an unprecedented speed. "We need to neutralize these pheromones," he said, turning to Xia. "Otherwise, we won't stand a chance against the cosmic equilibrium attack." Xia nodded, already moving towards the communications panel. "I'll coordinate with Dr. Skora and Dr. Lyra. We need a neutralizing agent, fast." As Xia worked with the medical team, Harris took charge of the ship's defenses. He directed the deployment of the Thunderbolt's advanced weapon systems, his enhanced tactical awareness allowing him to optimize their positioning despite the crew's impaired performance. Suddenly, a violent tremor rocked the ship. Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled over the intercom, panic evident in her tone. "Bridge, we've got a situation in the cargo hold. The hybrids, they're exhibiting some kind of powers. We can't contain them." Before Harris could respond, a wave of disorientation swept through the bridge. Several crew members clutched their heads, crying out in pain. Harris felt it too, a pressure building in his mind, accompanied by flashes of alien thoughts and emotions. "Telepathic abilities," he muttered, realizing the implications. "Some of the hybrids must be projecting their thoughts." Commander Blackwell staggered to his feet, his face a mask of drive despite the chaos around him. "We need to divert resources to contain and study these hybrids. Harris, Xia, I'm putting you in charge of this operation. Your enhanced abilities make you our best chance at managing this situation." As Harris and Xia prepared to leave the bridge, the tactical display lit up with multiple incoming signatures. The cosmic equilibrium fleet was closing in, their ships moving into attack formation. Blackwell's voice cut through the din. "All hands, battle stations. Initiate emergency protocols. Deploy all available weapon systems." The Thunderbolt shuddered as its advanced energy cannons powered up. Electromagnetic pulse generators hummed to life, creating a protective field around the ship. But the lingering effects of the pheromones on the crew resulted in delayed responses and coordination issues. Sergeant Ethan Reeves burst onto the bridge, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "Captain, Lieutenant, I found something crucial in the data we retrieved." He quickly explained his discovery, plans for a device capable of amplifying and controlling the hybrid pheromones on a massive scale. The implications were staggering. "They're planning to use this as a weapon," Harris said, his mind racing, "to destabilize both human and Orion societies." Before they could fully process this new information, the ship rocked violently. The cosmic equilibrium fleet had launched a barrage of missiles. Harris's enhanced tactical abilities kicked into overdrive. "Foster, evasive maneuvers, pattern Delta 7, he shouted to the pilot. Then turning to the weapons officer, he added, "Redirect point defense systems. Create a screen of intercepted missiles. Use the explosions to mask our movements. As the Thunderbolt executed Harris's daring defense strategy, Joe received an urgent communication from Dr. Skora. Captain, we've made a discovery about the hybrids. Their unstable physiology is producing increasingly potent and complex pheromones. It's dangerous, but it could be an opportunity. Xia's eyes met Harris's, a silent understanding passing between them. They had a potential weapon against the cosmic equilibrium, but using it would come with significant risks and ethical dilemmas. Before they could discuss further, the long-range sensors blared a warning. One of the cosmic equilibrium ships was showing a massive energy buildup. They're activating a large-scale version of the pheromone amplification device, Reeves announced, his voice tight with tension. Harris and Xia exchanged a grim look. They had moments to decide their next move, with the fate of the Thunderbolt, its crew, and possibly the entire balance of power in the galaxy hanging in the balance. As they prepared to make their decision, the ship's hull reverberated with a series of dull thuds. Enemy boarding pods had attached themselves to the Thunderbolt, and the sound of cutting torches filled the air. The battle for the UNS Thunderbolt was about to enter a new, desperate phase. The sound of cutting torches grew louder as the enemy boarding pods breached the Thunderbolt's outer hull. Harris and Xia exchanged a quick glance, their enhanced senses attuned to the chaos unfolding around them. They knew they had mere moments to act before the ship was overrun. Commander, Ward Harris said, turning to Blackwell, we need to implement our defense strategy now. Blackwell nodded grimly. Do it. Harris tapped his communicator. Dr. Skora, initiate the controlled release of hybrid pheromones into the ventilation system. Lyra, stand by to manipulate the composition. As the medical team rushed to set up the pheromone release system, Harris and Xia moved swiftly through the corridors, their movements perfectly synchronized. They reached the nearest breach point just as the first wave of cosmic equilibrium forces poured in. The close-quarters combat was intense and chaotic. Harris ducked under a swinging energy blade, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to counter with a swift uppercut that sent his attacker reeling. Beside him, Xia moved with fluid grace, her Orion strength amplified by her new abilities as she dispatched two enemies in rapid succession. Throughout the ship, similar scenes played out as the Thunderbolt's crew fought desperately against the boarding parties. The air grew thick with a sweet, musky scent of hybrid pheromones, intensifying with each passing moment. Harris felt the strain on his body, his muscles burning with exertion. He could sense Xia's fatigue through their bond, but they pushed on, repelling wave after wave of attackers. Suddenly, the ship-wide comm crackled to life. This is Commander Blackwell. All hands brace for countermeasure deployment. A surge of pheromones flooded the ship's atmosphere. Harris and Xia, already acclimated, felt a rush of renewed energy. The effect on the cosmic equilibrium forces was immediate and dramatic. Human attackers stumbled, their movements becoming erratic and uncoordinated. Orion boarders dropped their weapons, overcome by a powerful, uncontrolled, heat-like state. Seizing the opportunity, Harris shouted, "Now! Push them back!" He and Xia led the charge, their enhanced abilities allowing them to overpower the disoriented enemy forces with relative ease. They fought their way through the corridors, securing breached areas and driving the invaders back to their entry points. As they reached the final boarding pod, Harris received an urgent communication from Sergeant Reeves. "Captain, we've got a situation. Long-range sensors have detected a massive cosmic equilibrium dreadnought entering the system." Harris's mind raced, processing the tactical implications. He turned to Xia, their shared understanding evident in their eyes. "We need to board that ship," Harris said, his voice low and intense. Xia nodded. "It's our only chance." They made their way to the bridge, where Commander Blackwell was already coordinating the deployment of the Thunderbolt's secret weapon. The prototype faster-than-light communication device. "We're sending distress calls to both human and Orion fleets," Blackwell informed them. "But we need a plan to deal with that dreadnought." Harris stepped forward. "Sir, I propose a covert operation. We use the captured cosmic equilibrium boarding pods to infiltrate the dreadnought and disable its key systems from within." Blackwell's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly composed himself. "It's risky, but it might be our only option. Assemble your team. As Harris and Zia prepared for the mission, selecting a small group of human and Orion specialists, Dr. Skora approached them with a vial of iridescent liquid. "I've developed a compound that could temporarily boost your enhanced abilities," he explained, his voice tight with tension. "But I must warn you, the side effects could be significant." Harris looked at the vial, then at Zia. The decision burdened immensely on them both. The risks were clear, but so were the stakes of their mission. Without a word, they each took a dose of the compound. As the liquid coursed through their veins, they felt a surge of power unlike anything they had experienced before. Minutes later, they boarded the captured pod with their team. Through the view screen, they could see the massive form of the cosmic equilibrium, Dreadnought, growing larger, its imposing silhouette dominating the starfield. As the pod detached from the Thunderbolt and accelerated towards its target, Harris and Zia shared a moment of silent communication. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The Dreadnought loomed closer, its surface jam-packed with weapons and defense systems. Harris took a deep breath, steadying himself for the task ahead. "Prepare for docking," he ordered, his voice calm despite the tension that filled the small craft. As they approached the behemoth ship, the true scale of their mission became apparent. Success would mean turning the tide of battle. Failure could spell doom for the Thunderbolt and its crew. The captured pod maneuvered towards a secondary docking port, using the chaos of the ongoing battle as cover. As they made their final approach, Harris and Zia's enhanced senses were on high alert, ready for whatever challenges awaited them within the heart of the enemy vessel. The captured pod glided silently toward the Dreadnought, its stolen identification codes granting them safe passage through the initial security scans. As they approached, Harris turned to his team, his eyes locking with Zia's. "This is it," he said, his voice low and steady. "Dr. Skora's compound is our ace in the hole. The risks are high, but so are the stakes." Without hesitation, Harris and Zia each took a dose of the iridescent liquid. As it coursed through their veins, a surge of power unlike anything they had experienced before flooded their senses. The world around them sharpened, every detail coming into crisp focus. The pod docked with a soft thud, and Harris activated the cutting tool. The team worked in tense silence as they created a discreet entry point through the hull. As the last piece of metal fell away, they slipped into the Dreadnought's dim interior. Immediately, Harris's enhanced senses picked up the faint sound of approaching footsteps. He held up a hand, signaling the team to halt. Seconds later, a patrol of cosmic equilibrium soldiers marched past their position, oblivious to the intruder's presence. Zia tapped Harris's shoulder, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through his heightened nervous system. She pointed down a corridor to their left, her eidetic memory of Orion's ship layouts guiding their path. As they moved deeper into the ship, a sweet, musky scent filled the air. Harris felt a slight disorientation, but the effects were minimal compared to the rest of the team. He watched as the human members of the infiltration squad began to show signs of agitation, their movements becoming erratic. "The atmosphere," Zia whispered, her voice strained. "It's infused with a new pheromone compound." Harris nodded, noticing the flush creeping up Zia's neck. Her Orion biology was reacting differently to the pheromones, intensifying her heat-like state. He could feel her struggle through their bond, her attraction to him amplified to an almost unbearable degree. They reached a major junction, and Harris made a quick decision. "We need to split up. Zia, take half the team and head for the engine room. I'll lead the rest to the weapons control center." As they separated, Harris felt the telepathic connection with Zia stretch thin, like a rubber band pulled to its limit. The pheromone-laced atmosphere seemed to interfere with their bond, adding another layer of challenge to their already daunting mission. Harris led his team through a series of winding corridors, their progress slowed by the increasing aggression of his human companions. He found himself constantly mediating conflicts, his enhanced abilities allowing him to subdue outbursts before they attracted attention. As they neared the weapons control center, alarms blared throughout the ship. Their presence had been detected. Harris's team rounded a corner and found themselves face-to-face with a squad of cosmic equilibrium soldiers. The ensuing battle was a blur of motion. Harris moved with inhuman speed, his fists connecting with bone-crushing force. He ducked under energy blasts, using his heightened reflexes to outmaneuver his opponents. But even with his enhanced abilities, the continuous exertion was taking its toll. His muscles burned with each movement, his breath coming in ragged gasps. On the other side of the ship, Xia fought a different battle. The pheromone concentration increased as her team approached the engine room, and she felt her control slipping. Every nerve in her body seemed to be on fire, her skin hypersensitive to the slightest touch. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus on the complex security measures that stood between them and their objective. Suddenly, a new alarm sounded, its pitch different from the intruder alert. Sections of the ship began to depressurize, the cosmic equilibrium leadership making the desperate decision to vent parts of the Dreadnought into space. "Change of plans," Harris shouted into his communicator, hoping the message would reach Xia through their strained bond. "We need to move faster. They're trying to flush us out." He redoubled his efforts, pushing through the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm him. As they fought their way into the weapons control center, Harris's eyes widened at the sight before him. A massive device dominated the room, its design clearly a scaled-up version of the pheromone weapon they had encountered before. "This thing could affect entire star systems," he muttered, the implications sending a chill down his spine, despite the heat of battle. Across the ship, Xia and her team finally breached the engine room. The sight that greeted them was equally shocking. The Dreadnought's propulsion system was a marvel of hybrid technology, combining human and Orion designs in ways she had never seen before. As alarms blared and the ship shuddered around them, Xia's mind raced. This experimental reactor was the source of the Dreadnought's power, but it was also its weakness. With her unique understanding of both human and Orion tech, she knew she could exploit this vulnerability. Harris and Xia, separated by the vast expanse of the enemy ship but connected by their bond, prepared for the most crucial phase of their mission. The fate of countless lives hung in the balance as they readied themselves to sabotage the Dreadnought's key systems. The air grew thin as more sections of the ship were exposed to the vacuum of space. Time was running out. With one last surge of purpose, Harris and Xia began their desperate efforts to neutralize the threat of the cosmic equilibrium Dreadnought. Their enhanced bodies pushed to the very limits of endurance. Harris felt a sudden surge of energy coursing through his veins, his muscles tensing with newfound strength. Dr. Skora's compound was taking full effect, amplifying his already heightened abilities. In the weapons control center, Harris moved with lightning speed, his fists connecting with bone-crushing force against the remaining guards. The room secured, he turned his attention to the massive pheromone device dominating the space. "Begin disabling procedures," he ordered his team, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his system. As they worked, Harris noticed a complex series of fail-safes integrated into the weapons controls. His enhanced mind raced, analyzing the intricate web of security protocols. "Wait," he called out, stopping a team member from entering a command. "There's a self-destruct trigger. We need to bypass it carefully." Across the ship, Xia felt her body temperature skyrocket. The combination of the pheromone-laced atmosphere and Dr. Skora's compound sent waves of heat coursing through her. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus on the hybrid reactor before her. The engine room hummed with energy, the experimental propulsion system pulsing with an otherworldly glow. Xia's eyes darted across the control panels, her eidetic memory allowing her to process the unfamiliar hybrid technology. "There," she muttered, identifying a weakness in the cooling system. "We can cause a cascade failure without triggering a meltdown." As Xia began the delicate sabotage procedure, the ship lurched violently. More sections were being vented to space, causing artificial gravity to fluctuate wildly. Equipment floated off surfaces, forcing Xia and her team to grab onto sturdy fixtures to avoid being flung across the room. In the weapons control center, Harris used the chaos to his advantage. He leapt from console to console, using floating debris as cover while methodically disabling the Dreadnought's weapon systems. His heightened reflexes allowed him to dodge energy blasts from the few remaining guards, who struggled to maintain their footing in the fluctuating gravity. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. Harris had triggered a secondary security system. Holographic projectors activated, filling the room with lifelike decoys of cosmic equilibrium soldiers. "Stay alert!" Harris shouted to his team. "Trust your instincts. The holograms can't affect physical objects." He demonstrated by charging through a cluster of projections, his fist connecting solidly with a real guard who had been using the holograms as cover. Meanwhile, Zia's sabotage of the hybrid reactor was progressing faster than anticipated. Power fluctuations rippled through the ship, causing lights to flicker and systems to falter. "We need to stabilize the reaction," Zia called out, her voice strained. "If it shuts down too quickly, we'll be trapped here." As she worked, Zia felt her telepathic connection to Harris grow weaker. The reactor's unusual energy signature seemed to interfere with their bond, leaving her feeling isolated and disoriented. In the corridors of the massive ship, a new threat emerged. Swarms of miniature combat drones poured from hidden compartments, their metallic bodies gleaming in the emergency lighting. They moved with eerie coordination, seeking out the intruders with single-minded purpose. Harris, having secured the weapons control center, made the decision to regroup with Shia. He stepped into the corridor, immediately confronted by a wave of combat drones. Using his enhanced speed, he weaved through the swarm, snatching drones out of the air and crushing them in his grip. The journey to the engine room became a gauntlet of challenges. Harris led his team through sections of wildly fluctuating gravity, using his strength to pry open sealed bulkheads. They navigated pockets of vacuum, their suits straining against the pressure differential. As they neared the engine room, Harris encountered a formidable obstacle. Admiral Thorne, the cosmic equilibrium leader who had eluded capture in their previous encounter, stood blocking their path. The Admiral was encased in an advanced exosuit, its sleek design pulsing with energy. "Captain Harris," Thorne's amplified voice rang out, "I've been looking forward to this rematch." Without warning, Thorne charged. His exosuit matched Harris's enhanced speed, the two colliding with bone-jarring force. They exchanged a flurry of blows, each impact echoing through the corridor. Harris felt his muscles burning with exertion, the compound in his system pushing him to his physical limits. He ducked under a swing from Thorne, using the momentum to throw the Admiral into a nearby bulkhead. In the engine room, Zia completed the final steps of the reactor sabotage. The hybrid system's core pulsed erratically, energy arcing between conduits. "Containment protocols activating," a computerized voice announced. Emergency bulkheads began to lower, threatening to seal Zia and her team in the unstable engine room. "Move!" Zia shouted, pushing her team towards the exit. The rising radiation levels and surges of energy wreaked havoc on her already overtaxed body. She stumbled, her vision blurring as she fought to reach the closing bulkhead. Outside, Harris continued his intense battle with Admiral Thorne. The corridor around them bore the scars of their conflict, panels torn from walls and support struts bent from the force of their blows. "You can't win, Harris," Thorne taunted, his exosuit's systems compensating for the ship's instability. "Even if you defeat me, this ship will be your tomb." Harris didn't waste breath on a reply. He focused his enhanced senses, looking for a weakness in Thorne's defenses. The Dreadnought shuddered around them, the hybrid reactor's impending shutdown sending tremors through the massive vessel. As Harris prepared for another exchange with Thorne, his thoughts turned to Zia. Despite the interference, he could sense her distress through their weakened bond. Time was running out for both of them. With renewed drive, Harris launched himself at Admiral Thorne, the fate of the mission hanging in the balance. The Dreadnought, once a symbol of the cosmic equilibrium's power, now became a battleground where the future of human-Orion relations would be decided. Determined, the Dreadnought, once a symbol of the cosmic equilibrium's power, now became a battleground where the future of human-Orion relations would be decided. As Harris faced off against Admiral Thorne, he felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. Dr. Skora's compound reached its peak effectiveness, pushing his strength and reflexes to superhuman levels. The corridor became a blur of motion as the two opponents traded blows, their impacts echoing through the ship's structure. Thorne's exosuit whirred and hissed, compensating for the Dreadnought's failing systems. "You're full of surprises, Captain," the Admiral grunted, his voice distorted by his helmet's speakers. Harris didn't waste breath on a reply. He launched himself off a wall, using the fluctuating gravity to his advantage. His fist connected with Thorn's faceplate, sending hairline cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. Across the ship, Sia's fingers danced across the hybrid reactor's controls. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she fought against the rising temperature in the engine room. With a final sequence of commands, she triggered the cascade shutdown. "It's done," she called out to her team. "We need to move now." The Dreadnought shuddered violently as its main power systems failed. Emergency lighting flickered on, bathing the corridors in an eerie red glow. Zia stumbled towards the exit, her vision blurring as her body temperature soared dangerously high. The bulkhead began to descend, threatening to seal them in the unstable engine room. Zia's enhanced muscles strained as she wedged herself under the closing door, buying precious seconds for her team to escape. "Go!" she shouted, her voice hoarse. As the last team member slipped through, Zia rolled clear, the bulkhead slamming shut behind her. Outside the Dreadnought, the space battle took a dramatic turn. Commander Blackwell's voice crackled over the comms of the Allied ships. "The enemy vessel is compromised. All units concentrate fire on their weakened sections." A barrage of energy weapons and missiles struck the Dreadnought's hull, causing explosive decompressions in multiple areas. The massive ship began to list, debris trailing in its wake. Harris, sensing Zia's distress through their strained bond, redoubled his efforts against Thorn. He used the failing artificial gravity to his advantage, ricocheting off walls and ceilings in a dizzying assault. Thorn's exosuit sparked and smoked as Harris landed blow after punishing blow. "This ship may fall," the Admiral snarled, "but the cosmic equilibrium will rise again." Before Harris could respond, a massive explosion rocked the Dreadnought. The weapons control center breach sent a wall of debris hurtling towards them. Acting on pure instinct, Harris grabbed Thorn and propelled them both towards a nearby emergency airlock. They tumbled inside, the airlock sealing automatically behind them. Harris's ears popped as the chamber pressurized, the roar of escaping atmosphere cutting off abruptly. Meanwhile, Zia crawled through a maintenance shaft, fighting waves of disorientation. The combination of pheromones and Dr. Skora's compound left her hyper-aware of every sensation. She could feel the vibrations of the failing ship through her fingertips, hear the creaking of stressed metal all around her. As she emerged into a corridor, she found herself face to face with a group of panicking, cosmic equilibrium crew members. Their eyes widened at the sight of her, a mix of fear and confusion evident on their faces. Shia felt a surge of pheromones, amplified by her current state. "The ship is lost," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly calm. "Head for the escape pods. There's still time." The crew members' expressions shifted, their panic giving way to a trance-like obedience. They turned as one, moving purposefully toward the evacuation routes. As Jill watched them go, a familiar voice cut through her haze. "Impressive display, Lieutenant." She whirled to find Dr. Zara standing at the end of the corridor, a sleek prototype weapon aimed squarely at her chest. The Orion scientist's eyes gleamed with a mix of scientific curiosity and purpose. "I wondered how our pheromone research would interact with human biology," Dr. Zara continued, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Let's see how you handle the latest iteration." A burst of concentrated pheromones erupted from the weapon, enveloping Xie in a cloud of potent chemicals. For a moment, her senses reeled, threatening to overwhelm her. But her heightened state allowed her to push through the effect, her mind clearing with startling speed. Dr. Zara's eyes widened in surprise as Zia charged forward, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. The two Orions grappled, the prototype weapon clattering to the floor. As they struggled, Zia experienced a sudden flash of awareness. Through her bond with Harris, she caught glimpses of his current situation: the damaged airlock, the unconscious form of Admiral Thorn, the rapidly deteriorating condition of the ship around him. The momentary distraction was all Dr. Zara needed. She broke free from Sia's grip, scooping up her fallen weapon as she retreated down the corridor. "This isn't over," she called out, disappearing around a corner. Sia started to pursue but stumbled as the deck lurched beneath her feet. The Dreadnought's orbit was decaying rapidly, sections of the massive ship beginning to break apart under the strain of atmospheric entry. Through the haze of fatigue and sensory overload, one thought crystallized in Xia's mind. She needed to reach Harris and find a way off this doomed vessel. With renewed purpose, she set off through the disintegrating ship, navigating towards the hangar bay where their infiltration pod waited. As she ran, dodging falling debris and leaping over widening fissures in the deck plating, Xia felt the experimental compound in her system beginning to wear off. Each step became a battle against exhaustion, her muscles screaming in protest. Ahead, through the flickering emergency lights and clouds of vented atmosphere, Xia caught sight of a familiar figure. Harris, looking as battered and weary as she felt, was working frantically on their damaged infiltration pod. Their eyes met across the chaotic hangar bay, a moment of shared relief cutting through the mayhem around them. But there was no time for reunion. The bay doors were beginning to buckle, the void of space visible through widening cracks. As Xia reached the pod, Harris's voice carried over the din of tearing metal and blaring alarms. "We've got one shot at this," he shouted, his hands flying over the control panel. "Strap in!" They secured themselves just as the hangar bay doors gave way. The violent depressurization threatened to pull them into space, the pod's engines straining against the vacuum's relentless pull. With a final surge of power, the infiltration pod broke free, rocketing out of the disintegrating Dreadnought. Harris and Xia watched through the viewport as the massive ship broke apart, creating a fiery display against the backdrop of the nearby moon. As the immediate danger passed, Harris and Xia shared a look of exhausted triumph. Their mission was accomplished, but the full consequences of their actions, and the changes to their own bodies, were yet to be realized. The damaged pod limped toward the Thunderbolt, leaving the remains of the Cosmic Equilibrium's flagship burning in the atmosphere behind them. The damaged pod limped towards the Thunderbolt, leaving behind the fiery remnants of the Cosmic Equilibrium's flagship. As they approached, Harris and Xia felt the last vestiges of Dr. Skora's compound fade from their systems. The adrenaline rush that had sustained them through their harrowing escape gave way to bone-deep exhaustion. "Thunderbolt, this is Captain Harris, requesting emergency docking procedures," Harris called out, his voice hoarse. "Copy that, Captain. Initiating tractor beam guidance," came the response from the bridge. The pod shuddered as the Thunderbolt's tractor beams locked on, guiding them towards the hangar bay. Harris and Xia exchanged a weary glance, relief mingling with the growing awareness of their body's protest. As the pod touched down in the hangar, the hatch hissed open. Medical teams rushed forward, led by Dr. Skora himself. The doctor's eyes were sharp with concern as he took in the sight of the two battered officers. "Easy now," Dr. Skora said, helping Harris out of the pod. "Let's get you both to medical bay immediately." Xia stumbled as she exited, her legs nearly giving out. A medic caught her, supporting her weight. "I'm fine," she insisted, even as her vision swam. "You're far from fine, Lieutenant," Dr. Skora retorted, already running a handheld scanner over them both. "Your body temperatures are elevated, and I'm detecting significant changes in muscle density and neural activity." As they were escorted to the medical bay, Harris caught sight of Commander Blackwell striding towards them, his face a mask of concern and urgency. "Captain, Lieutenant, excellent work," Blackwell said, falling into step beside them. "But I'm afraid we don't have time to rest on our laurels. The destruction of the Dreadnought has set off a chain reaction across both human and Orion space. Cosmic equilibrium sleeper cells are activating, hitting key installations." Harris nodded grimly, fighting off a wave of dizziness. "We retrieved critical data from the Dreadnought. It should help us counter their moves." "Good," Blackwell replied. "I've got Sergeant Reeves and his team working on it now. Get yourselves checked out. I'll need a full debrief as soon as you're cleared." In the medical bay, Dr. Skora and Dr. Lyra set to work, running a battery of tests on Harris and Xia. The two patients lay on adjacent beds, acutely aware of each other's presence, despite the flurry of activity around them. "Fascinating," Dr. Lyra murmured, studying a holographic display of their neural scans. "The bond between you has intensified significantly. Your brainwave patterns are showing unprecedented levels of synchronization." Harris turned his head to look at Gia, feeling a surge of something. It wasn't quite an emotion, more like an echo of sensation. "I can feel what she's feeling," he said, surprise evident in his voice. Gia nodded, her eyes wide. "It's like a shared awareness, stronger than before." Dr. Skora frowned, making notes on his datapad. This level of empathic connection wasn't anticipated. We'll need to monitor it closely. As the doctors continued their examination, a commotion at the entrance to the medical bay drew their attention. A group of the rescued hybrids was being brought in, their conditions finally stabilized enough for transfer. Among them was Lyra, the female hybrid who had aided in developing the pheromone countermeasure. Her gaze locked onto Harris and Gia, a look of recognition and curiosity crossing her features. "You," she said, her voice carrying a hint of an otherworldly resonance. "Your physiologies, they've changed, become more like ours." Dr. Skora looked between Lyra and his patients, his scientific curiosity piqued. "Lyra, would you be willing to assist us? Your insights into hybrid physiology could be invaluable." Lyra nodded, moving closer to Harris and Gia's beds. As she approached, both officers felt a strange resonance, as if their newly enhanced senses were reacting to her presence. "Your bond," Lyra said, her head tilted slightly. "It's not just mental or emotional. There's a physical component now. Your bodies are harmonizing." As if to underscore her words, Harris felt a sudden spike of sensation course through him. He gasped, his back arching slightly off the bed. Beside him, Gia experienced the same, their reactions mirroring each other perfectly. Dr. Skora's eyes widened as he observed the readings on his monitors. "Incredible. Their neural pathways are aligning even further. This could have significant implications for their abilities in the field." Before they could delve deeper into the implications of these changes, the medical bay's comm system crackled to life. Commander Blackwell's voice came through, tension evident in his tone. "Dr. Skora, I need a status update on Captain Harris and Lieutenant Zia. We've just received word of a major cosmic equilibrium attack on a joint research station. I need to know if they're fit for duty." Dr. Skora hesitated, looking between his patients and the comm panel. "Commander, their condition is complex. We're still assessing the full extent of the changes they've undergone." "I understand, Doctor, but we may not have the luxury of time. The attack bears signs of advanced hybrid technology. We need every asset we can muster." As Blackwell spoke, Harris and Gia shared a look. Despite their exhaustion and the uncertainty surrounding their condition, they both felt a pull towards action. The bond between them seemed to hum with shared purpose. "We're ready, Commander," Harris said, pushing himself up to a sitting position. Gia nodded in agreement, mirroring his movement. Dr. Skora opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, another voice cut in. "Perhaps there is a way to prepare them more thoroughly for what lies ahead," the new voice said, smooth and authoritative. All eyes turned to see a regal Orion female standing in the doorway of the medical bay. Her presence seemed to fill the room, commanding attention. "Ambassador Thela," Dr. Lyra said, bowing her head slightly in respect. The ambassador's gaze fell on Harris and Shia, a look of intense interest in her eyes. "I've been briefed on your unique situation. There is an Orion ritual that could help stabilize and strengthen your bond. It may be the key to fully harnessing your new abilities." Harris and Gia exchanged another glance, a mix of curiosity and apprehension passing between them. The idea of further altering their already complex physiology gave them pause, but the urgency of the situation pressed upon them. As they contemplated the ambassador's offer, alarms began to blare throughout the ship. Commander Blackwell's voice came over the ship-wide comm system, tension evident in his tone. "All hands, battle stations. Cosmic equilibrium forces detected on approach. Prepare for potential engagement." The medical bay erupted into a flurry of activity. Dr. Skora and his team moved to secure equipment and prepare for potential casualties. Ambassador Thela stood firm, her eyes never leaving Harris and Gia. "Your decision may shape the course of this conflict," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Are you prepared to take the next step?" Harris and Shia sat on the edges of their beds, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The bond between them thrummed with shared tension and drive. As the Thunderbolt's engines roared to life, prepare for battle, they knew their choice would have far-reaching consequences for themselves and the conflict that raged around them. As the ship's alarms continued to blare, Harris and Gia locked eyes, coming to a silent agreement. "We're in," Harris said, turning to Ambassador Thela. "What does this ritual entail?" The ambassador's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of approval crossed her eyes. "Follow me," she instructed, leading them out of the medical bay. As they moved through the corridors of the Thunderbolt, crew members rushed past, preparing for the impending engagement. The ship vibrated beneath their feet as it maneuvered into a defensive position. Ambassador Thela guided them to a small, dimly lit chamber near the ship's core. The room was sparsely furnished, with a circular platform in the center surrounded by softly glowing orbs. "This is a modified version of our traditional bonding chamber," Thela explained, gesturing for Harris and Gia to step onto the platform. "We don't have time for the full ritual, but this should help stabilize your connection." Dr. Skora, who had insisted on accompanying them, stood at the edge of the room, monitoring their vital signs on a handheld device. "I still have reservations about this," he muttered, but made no move to stop the proceedings. Ambassador Thela produced 2 small, iridescent tokens from a pouch at her waist. "These contain concentrated pheromones unique to your individual biochemistries," she said, handing one to each of them. "Exchange them, then maintain physical contact for the duration of the ritual." Harris and Gia complied, their fingers brushing as they swapped tokens. As they clasped hands, the orbs surrounding the platform began to pulse with a soft, rhythmic light. A warm sensation spread from their joined hands, traveling up their arms and suffusing their bodies. Harris felt his awareness of Gia sharpen, her presence in his mind becoming more defined, more immediate. She gasped softly as the sensation intensified. She could feel Harris's heartbeat as clearly as her own, their breathing falling into sync without conscious effort. As the ritual progressed, flashes of sensation and memory passed between them. The adrenaline rush of combat, the sharp tang of fear, the fierce joy of victory, all shared and amplified through their strengthening bond. After several minutes, the pulsing lights began to fade. Harris and Gia opened their eyes, not realizing they had closed them. They found themselves standing closer together, their free hands intertwined. "Remarkable," Dr. Skora murmured, studying his readings. "Their neural synchronization has increased by over 200%. Ambassador Thela nodded, satisfied. "The bond is stable for now. It will require further attention later, but it should serve for the immediate crisis." As if on cue, Commander Blackwell's voice came over the ship's comm system. "Captain Harris, Lieutenant Zia, report to the bridge immediately. We're approaching the attacked research station." Harris and Zia separated reluctantly, the physical contact broken, but the mental connection humming between them. "We're on our way," Harris responded, leading the way out of the chamber. As they hurried through the ship, they found themselves moving in perfect coordination, anticipating each other's movements with uncanny precision. Crew members they passed gave them curious looks, sensing something had changed but unable to pinpoint what. They arrived on the bridge to find it a hive of focused activity. Through the main viewport, they could see the research station, surrounded by several cosmic equilibrium ships. The station's hull was breached in multiple places, debris floating in the vacuum around it. "Status report," Harris demanded, slipping into command mode effortlessly. Commander Blackwell turned from his tactical display. "The station's defenses are down. The equilibrium forces are using tractor beams to extract research materials. We've detected life signs still on board, but they're fading fast." Sija stepped forward, her mind already racing through tactical scenarios. "We need to get on that station," she said, her voice carrying an edge of urgency that Harris felt echoed in his own chest. Blackwell nodded grimly. "Agreed. We're preparing a 2-pronged assault. The Thunderbolt will engage the enemy ships while you two lead a team to infiltrate the station." Chief Engineer Wong approached, carrying 2 sleek, form-fitting combat suits. "We've just finished the modifications," he said, handing the suits to Harris and Shia. "These should support your enhanced physiology and provide better protection in the vacuum of space." As Harris and Shia quickly donned the new suits, they felt the material conform to their bodies. interfaces linking with their neural implants. The sensation was strange, but not uncomfortable, like a second skin. "We'll need to perform a space jump," Zia said, her mind already plotting the trajectory. Harris nodded, the plan forming between them without need for verbal communication. "It's high risk," Blackwell warned, "but it's our best shot at getting you on board undetected." Harris and Zia moved towards the airlock, a small team of Marines falling in behind them. As they prepared for the jump, Harris felt a surge of adrenaline, amplified by Zia's matching excitement. The airlock cycled open, revealing the vast expanse of space. The damaged research station loomed before them, surrounded by the sleek, predatory shapes of the cosmic equilibrium ships. Harris and Zia shared one last look, their enhanced bond allowing them to communicate volumes in a single glance. Then as one, they launched themselves into the void, their team following close behind. As they hurtled through space towards the station, the Thunderbolt opened fire, engaging the enemy ships. The vacuum around them lit up with weapons fire and explosions, creating a deadly, silent light show. Using their suit's thrusters, Harris and Zia maneuvered through the debris field, their movements perfectly synchronized. They aimed for a breach in the station's hull, large enough to allow entry but small enough to have escaped the equilibrium force's notice. As they approached the opening, Harris felt a spike of alarm through the bond. Zia had spotted movement inside the breach. They weren't going in undetected after all. They braced themselves for a fight as they crossed the threshold into the station, artificial gravity taking hold as they landed in a crouch. Ahead of them, a group of figures emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Harris and Zia stood back to back, facing the approaching threat. Through their bond, they could feel each other's racing heartbeats, the surge of combat readiness, and beneath it all, a growing undercurrent of something more primal, more intense. As the hybrid soldiers of the cosmic equilibrium charged forward, Harris and Zia prepared to put their newly enhanced abilities to the ultimate test. As the hybrid soldiers closed in, Harris and Zia moved in perfect synchronization, their enhanced abilities flowing through them like electricity. Harris ducked low, sweeping the legs out from under the nearest attacker, while Zia vaulted over his back, her fist connecting with another hybrid's jaw in a devastating uppercut. The bond between them hummed with shared adrenaline and tactical awareness, allowing them to anticipate each other's moves and cover blind spots instinctively. The Marines behind them fanned out, providing covering fire as Harris and Zia pushed deeper into the station. Alarms blared, and emergency lights cast eerie red shadows across the twisted metal and floating debris. "Life signs detected," Zia called out, her suit's sensors picking up faint readings. 2 levels down, section C7. Harris nodded, feeling the urgency through their connection. "Team Alpha, secure this area. Beta team with us." They moved swiftly through the damaged corridors, dispatching resistance with ruthless efficiency. Their newly enhanced physiology allowed them to push beyond normal human limits, moving faster, striking harder, and reacting with preternatural speed. As they approached C7, a massive explosion rocked the station. Harris stumbled, but Zia's hand shot out, steadying him before he even realized he was off balance. Through the bond, he felt her concern mingled with his own. "Thunderbolt to ground team," Commander Blackwell's voice crackled over the comm. "We've taken heavy fire. Multiple equilibrium reinforcements have arrived. You need to wrap this up fast." "Copy that," Harris responded, his mind already racing through extraction scenarios. "We're approaching the survivors now." They breached the sealed doors of C7, finding a group of terrified researchers huddled behind makeshift barricades. Among them, a familiar face looked up with a mix of relief and apprehension. "Captain Harris," Dr. Zara said, her voice hoarse. I didn't expect to see you here." Before Harris could respond, another tremor shook the station. Zia's voice cut through his thoughts, both aloud and through their bond. "We need to move, now." As they began evacuating the survivors, a piercing shriek filled the air. A new wave of hybrid soldiers poured into the chamber, their eyes glowing with an unnatural, feral light. Harris and Zia moved as one, placing themselves between the hybrids and the researchers. As they engaged the enemy, Harris felt a surge of something primal and intense flowing through their bond. Each punch thrown, each kick landed, seemed to amplify the connection between them. The fight was brutal and swift. Harris and Xia's enhanced abilities, combined with their perfect synchronization, proved too much for even the advanced hybrids. As the last enemy fell, they found themselves face to face, breathing heavily, the air between them charged with something more than just the aftermath of combat. "Captain," one of the Marines called out, breaking the moment, "we've secured a path to the extraction point." Shaking off the lingering tension, Harris nodded. "Move out. Double time." They escorted the survivors through the chaotic station, fighting their way past pockets of resistance. As they approached the hangar where their shuttle waited, a massive explosion ripped through the hull nearby. Debris and bodies were sucked out into the vacuum of space. "Go!" Harris shouted, ushering the last of the researchers into the shuttle. He and Xia provided covering fire as the Marine team boarded, then backed in themselves just as the hangar doors began to buckle. The shuttle launched, narrowly escaping as the research station began to break apart behind them. Through the view screen, they watched as the Thunderbolt engaged the equilibrium forces in a fierce firefight. As the shuttle maneuvered through the chaos of battle, Harris became acutely aware of Xia's presence beside him. The intensity of combat still thrummed through their bond, mingled now with something else, a pull, a heat that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. They docked with the Thunderbolt amidst a barrage of weapons fire. As soon as they were aboard, Commander Blackwell's voice came over the ship-wide comm. "All hands brace for emergency jump. Engineering, push those engines to the limit." The ship lurched as it entered FTL, leaving the devastation of the research station behind. In the sudden quiet that followed, Harris turned to Xi, 1,000 unspoken thoughts passing between them through their enhanced connection. Before either of them could speak, Dr. Skora approached, his medical scanner already whirring. "Captain, Lieutenant, I need you both in medical immediately. Your biosigns are concerning." As they made their way to the medical bay, Harris could feel the eyes of the crew upon them. Something had changed, not just in them, but in how others perceived them. The air seemed charged with an invisible tension. In the medical bay, Dr. Skora ran a battery of tests, his frown deepening with each result. "This is unprecedented," he muttered, studying a display of their neural patterns. "The Orion bonding ritual, combined with your already altered physiology, it's caused some unexpected changes." Harris felt a spike of alarm through his connection with Xia. "What kind of changes?" she asked, her voice steady despite the concern Harris could sense beneath it. Before Dr. Skora could answer, Commander Blackwell's voice came over the comm again. "Senior staff to the briefing room immediately. We need to plan our next move." As they left the medical bay, Harris and Xia exchanged a glance. Whatever was happening to them, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face it together. The bond between them hummed with shared dedication as they headed to the briefing room, ready to confront the next phase of their mission against the cosmic equilibrium. Equilibrium. Harris took a deep breath, steeling himself for the next phase of their mission. He glanced at Xia, their eyes meeting briefly. The intensity of their shared experience on the research station still lingered, an undercurrent of energy humming between them. "Captain Harris, Lieutenant Xia," Commander Blackwell's voice cut through their moment of connection. "Report to Hangar Bay 3 immediately. Your stealth shuttle is prepped and waiting." They moved swiftly through the corridors of the Thunderbolt, their steps in perfect sync. As they entered the hangar, Chief Engineer Wong was waiting for them, holding 2 compact devices. "Latest sensor jamming tech," he explained, handing them over. "Should help you slip past their defenses undetected." Harris nodded, feeling the weight of the mission settle on his shoulders. Let's hope it works as well as advertised. As they boarded the shuttle, Harris felt a surge of something electric through his bond with Xia. The small confines of the craft seemed to amplify their awareness of each other, every movement suddenly magnified. The hangar doors slid open, revealing the vast expanse of space. Ahead, the asteroid field that concealed the cosmic equilibrium base loomed dark and treacherous. "Initiating launch sequence," Xia announced, her fingers dancing over the controls. Harris felt an echo of her focus and purpose through their connection. The shuttle glided out of the Thunderbolt, its experimental cloaking technology engaging with a soft hum. As they approached the outer defense perimeter of the hidden base, Harris activated the sensor jamming devices. Picking up multiple cloaked mines, Zia reported, her voice tense. Automated defense platforms at 2 and 10 o'clock. Harris gripped the controls tighter, maneuvering the shuttle through the deadly maze. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple as they narrowly avoided collision with a massive asteroid. Proximity alert, Zia called out. Harris banked hard to port, the shuttle's hull scraping against a hidden defensive structure with a nerve-wracking screech. As they penetrated deeper into the asteroid field, the tension in the small cockpit seemed to thicken. Harris became acutely aware of Zia's presence beside him, the scent of her skin, the sound of her quickened breathing. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of distraction. There, Zia pointed, her voice husky. Concealed docking port, 2 degrees starboard. Harris guided the shuttle towards the hidden entrance, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. With painstaking precision, they executed a risky docking maneuver, latching on to the port without triggering any alarms. As the airlock cycled, Harris and Zia donned their specialized infiltration gear. The moment the inner doors slid open, they were hit by a wave of something intangible, yet overwhelmingly potent. What is that? Harris gasped, his senses reeling. Xia's eyes widened, her pupils dilating visibly. Pheromones, she managed, her voice strained. Much stronger than on the Dreadnought. They pushed forward into the facility, fighting against the pheromone-induced haze that threatened to cloud their judgment. Every breath seemed to intensify the effect, making it harder to focus on anything but each other. Moving through the corridors with preternatural stealth, they avoided patrols and security checkpoints. Their enhanced abilities allowed them to slip past detection, but the constant struggle against their physical urges was rapidly depleting their stamina. As they approached a junction, the sound of voices made them freeze. Harris pulled Zia into a shadowy alcove, their bodies pressed close in the confined space. The proximity sent a jolt of electricity through their bond, their heightened senses overwhelmed by each other's presence. For a moment, the mission faded into the background. Harris found himself lost in Xia's eyes, their faces mere inches apart. He could feel her rapid heartbeat, smell the intoxicating scent of her skin. Their lips drew closer, the pull between them nearly irresistible. A sudden crash from down the corridor snapped them back to reality. They sprang apart, both breathing heavily, their faces flushed. We need to stay focused, Zia whispered, her voice rough with suppressed emotion. Harris nodded, forcing himself to concentrate on their objective. They continued deeper into the facility, eventually stumbling upon a laboratory that made their blood run cold. Through a large observation window, they saw rows of human and Orion subjects in various stages of pheromone-induced states. Scientists in protective gear moved among them, taking readings and administering injections. We have to stop this, Harris growled, his hands clenching into fists. They pressed on, finally locating the main power distribution center. As they began planting explosive charges, the complex alien technology forced them to work in maddeningly close proximity. Harris fumbled with a particularly intricate piece of wiring, his hands shaking slightly. Xia reached out to steady him, her touch sending a shock of awareness through his system. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. A sudden alarm shattered the moment. They whirled to see a patrol of advanced hybrid soldiers pouring into the room, led by a familiar face, Dr. Zara. I'm disappointed, Captain, she said, her voice cold. I expected better from you. Before Harris could respond, Dr. Zara activated a device on her wrist. A thick mist burst from hidden vents, filling the air with an even more concentrated dose of pheromones. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Harris felt his body responding, every nerve ending on fire. Beside him, Xia let out a small gasp, her eyes wide and dark. The hybrid soldiers advanced, their movements unnaturally fluid. Harris and Xia fell into fighting stances, back to back, their bodies humming with a dangerous mix of combat readiness and primal attraction. As the first hybrid lunged forward, Harris felt a surge of raw power course through him. He moved with inhuman speed, his fist connecting with bone-crushing force. Beside him, Zia was a blur of motion, her kicks and strikes flowing with deadly grace. They fought in perfect synchronization, their enhanced abilities pushed to the limit by the flood of chemicals in their systems. Each movement, each point of contact between them, sent shockwaves of sensation through their bond. Dr. Zara watched in growing alarm as her hybrid soldiers fell one by one to the savage onslaught. She backed away, reaching for a communication device, but Zia was on her in an instant, disarming her with a swift, brutal efficiency. With the immediate threat neutralized, Harris and Zia stood panting in the center of the room, surrounded by fallen enemies. The air was thick with pheromones, their bodies trembling with scarcely controlled energy. They turned to each other, the intensity of their gazes almost palpable. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if they might give in to the overwhelming urges coursing through them. Instead, Harris gritted his teeth and turned to the control panel. "We need to finish this," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. They activated the explosive charges, timing them to coincide with the Thunderbolt's approach. As alarms blared throughout the base, they began their extraction, fighting through waves of security forces. The facility shook with the first impacts of the Thunderbolt's assault. Explosions rocked the structure, adding to the chaos as Harris and Zia battled their way back to their docked shuttle. They reached the airlock, both gasping for breath, their bodies pushed to the limit by the combination of combat and chemical assault. As the doors slid open, revealing their waiting shuttle, a stray missile struck nearby. The impact sent them sprawling, debris raining down around them. Harris pulled Zia to her feet, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared dedication. They stumbled into the shuttle, initiating emergency launch procedures as the base crumbled around them. As they disengaged from the docking port, another explosion rocked the shuttle. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. "Propulsion system damage," Zia reported, her fingers flying over the controls. "We're losing power." Harris looked out the viewport at the battle raging around them, the cosmic equilibrium base breaking apart under the Thunderbolt's assault. They were trapped, their crippled shuttle drifting between the collapsing structure and the deadly vacuum of space. He turned to Sia, seeing his own mixture of fear and drive reflected in her eyes. The pheromones still coursed through their systems, their bodies humming with unreleased tension. As alarms blared and the shuttle spun slowly in space, they faced the grim reality of their situation, caught between certain doom and an uncertain rescue. Future. The shuttle lurched violently, sending Harris and Zia stumbling against the control panel. Warning lights flashed across the displays, painting the cockpit in an eerie red glow. "Hull integrity compromised," Zia reported, her fingers flying over the controls. "We're venting atmosphere." Harris gritted his teeth, fighting against the growing sense of vertigo as the shuttle spun slowly in the vacuum. He could feel Zia's fear and commitment through their bond, a mirror of his own emotions. "Rerouting power to maneuvering thrusters," he said, his voice strained. "We need to get clear of this debris field." As Harris worked, Zia activated the emergency beacon. "Thunderbolt, this is Lieutenant Zia. We've sustained critical damage and require immediate assistance." Static crackled over the comms, punctuated by bursts of weapons fire. The battle raged on around them, oblivious to their plight. A sudden impact rocked the shuttle, and a hissing sound filled the air. Harris spun to see a jagged piece of debris protruding through the hull, mere inches from where Zia stood. "Seal it," he shouted, already moving to assist. Together they wrestled the emergency bulkhead into place, cutting off the damaged section. The hissing stopped, but the shuttle's interior had shrunk considerably, leaving them in cramped quarters. With the immediate crisis averted, Harris returned to the controls. The maneuvering thrusters sputtered to life, giving them some semblance of control. He carefully guided the shuttle away from the disintegrating cosmic equilibrium base, narrowly avoiding collisions with chunks of debris and stray weapons fire. "Oxygen levels dropping," Zia warned, her voice tight. "We have maybe 20 minutes of breathable air left." Harris nodded grimly, focusing on piloting their crippled craft. The pheromones still coursing through their systems made every movement, every breath, a struggle against distraction. He could feel Jia's presence behind him, her proximity sending jolts of awareness through his body. A distant flash caught his attention. "Incoming craft," he announced, squinting at the sensors. "Multiple signatures. Thunderbolt fighters." Relief flooded through their bond, tempered by the knowledge that they weren't out of danger yet. As the fighters approached, a new threat emerged on their sensors. "Cosmic equilibrium interceptors," Xia reported. "They're moving to engage our rescue squad." The space around them erupted into a furious dogfight. Energy weapons lanced through the void, narrowly missing their shuttle. Harris pushed the damaged craft to its limits, executing a series of evasive maneuvers that left them both gasping for the rapidly thinning air. A stray shot clipped their port side, sending them into a wild spin. Warning klaxons blared as more systems failed. "Life support critical," Xia called out, her voice growing faint. "Harris, we're losing." Her words trailed off as she slumped in her seat, overcome by the lack of oxygen. Harris felt his own consciousness fading, his vision narrowing to a pinpoint. Just as darkness threatened to engulf him, a jolt ran through the shuttle. Through blurred vision, he saw a Thunderbolt fighter pull alongside them, a magnetic grapple line connecting the two craft. "This is Captain Elena Rodriguez," a voice crackled over the comms. "Hang tight, we're bringing you in." The sudden acceleration as they were towed towards safety sent Harris and Xia colliding into each other. The physical contact, combined with their pheromone-addled state, sent a surge of electricity through their bond. For a moment, the universe narrowed to just the two of them, their faces mere inches apart. A violent shudder broke the moment. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through again, tight with tension. "My engines are hit. We're losing power." Harris forced himself to focus, pushing aside the distracting pull of Xia's proximity. "We still have some power," he said. "If we link our systems, we might have enough juice to make it back." Working in perfect synchronization, Harris and Xia quickly interfaced their shuttle's remaining power with the fighter systems. It was a patchwork solution, but it was their only hope. "It's working," Rodriguez reported, adjusting course for the Thunderbolt. The joined vessels limped through space, dodging debris and the occasional stray shot from the dwindling battle. Harris and Xia worked in tandem, their enhanced abilities allowing them to anticipate each other's actions with uncanny precision. As they approached the Thunderbolt, Harris felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, leaving him acutely aware of every ache and pain. Beside him, Xia looked equally drained, her usually pristine uniform stained and torn. The shuttle and fighter were guided into the Thunderbolt's hangar bay with agonizing slowness. As the pressure equalized and the doors sealed behind them, Harris and Xia stumbled out of the shuttle, supporting each other. Medical teams swarmed around them, their voices a confused blur. Harris caught snippets of conversation. Elevated heart rates, unusual pheromone signatures, potential physiological changes. Commander Blackwell strode into the hangar, her face a mask of concern. "Get them to decontamination and medical evaluation immediately," she ordered. As they were led away, Harris caught a glimpse of the shuttle's databanks being removed. The information they had risked everything to obtain was safe, but at what cost? In the medical bay, Dr. Stor ran a series of scans, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The concentrated pheromones you were exposed to on the cosmic equilibrium base," he began, "they've caused further alterations to your physiology." Harris and Xia exchanged a worried glance. Whatever these changes meant, they knew their fight against the cosmic equilibrium was far from finished. As the doctor continued his examination, alarms began to sound throughout the ship. "Multiple contacts detected," a voice announced over the intercom. "Cosmic equilibrium vessels fleeing the sector." Commander Blackwell's voice cut through the chaos. "All hands to battle stations. We can't let them escape with their research." Harris and Xia moved to stand, but Dr. Stor held up a hand. "You're in no condition for combat," he said firmly. "Whatever these changes are, we need to understand them before you return to active duty." As the Thunderbolt surged into pursuit, Harris and Xia were left to grapple with the aftermath of their mission and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The bond between them hummed with shared apprehension and an undercurrent of something deeper, more primal. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Together. The medical bay doors hissed open as Harris and Gia were rushed inside on hover gurneys. Dr. Scora's team swarmed around them, attaching monitors and initiating decontamination procedures. The acrid smell of disinfectant filled the air as the two operatives were carefully transferred to separate biocontainment units. Vitals are erratic, a medic called out, her eyes fixed on the fluctuating readings. Heart rates elevated, brain activity off the charts. Dr. Scora leaned over Harris, his brow furrowed as he studied the data streaming across his tablet. These pheromone levels, I've never seen anything like it. It's as if their bodies are producing a completely new chemical compound. Harris turned his head, catching Gia's gaze through the transparent walls of their isolation units. He could feel her presence, a steady pulse at the edge of his consciousness. The bond between them seemed to hum with increased intensity, defying the physical barriers separating them. Days blurred together as Harris and Gia underwent a battery of tests and treatments. Their bodies, already altered by their initial transformation, continued to change in subtle but significant ways. Dr. Scora and his team worked tirelessly, analyzing blood samples and tissue cultures, searching for a way to stabilize their rapidly evolving physiology. On the fourth day of their confinement, Harris woke to find Dr. Scora standing over him, a concerned expression on his face. "We've detected a new development," the doctor said, his voice tight. "Your bodies are now producing a hybrid form of human and Orion pheromones. The combination is potent, to say the least. We're going to have to move you to specialized quarantine chambers to prevent any impact on the rest of the crew." As Harris was transferred to his new isolation unit, he caught a glimpse of Gia being moved to an adjacent chamber. Their eyes met briefly, and he felt a surge of something. Desire, concern. The emotions were too tangled to separate. On us through the walls of their quarantine chambers, Harris and Gia could hear the constant hum of activity aboard the Thunderbolt. Commander Blackwell's voice occasionally crackled over the intercom, issuing orders as they pursued the scattered cosmic equilibrium forces. "Multiple contacts detected in the Vega system," Blackwell's voice announced. "All hands, prepare for potential engagement." Harris pressed his hand against the wall of his chamber, frustration mounting. He could feel Gia's matching tension through their bond, their shared desire to be out there, to be useful. As days stretched into weeks, Harris and Gia's isolation was punctuated by visits from Dr. Scora and his team. Each checkup revealed new changes in their physiology, their bodies continuing to adapt and evolve in response to the hybrid pheromones they now produced. "Your cellular regeneration rates have increased exponentially," Dr. Scora explained during one such visit. "And your neural pathways, they're reconfiguring in ways I've never seen before. It's as if your bodies are optimizing themselves for something." The doctor's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. What were they becoming? And to what end? Their forced inaction came to an abrupt end when alarms blared throughout the ship. Commander Blackwell's voice cut through the chaos. "We've detected a cosmic equilibrium outpost in the nearby asteroid belt. Prepare for infiltration operations." Dr. Scora entered their quarantine area, his face a mask of concern and persistence. "We've developed a temporary suppressant for your pheromones," he said, holding up 2 injectors. "It's not perfect, but it should allow you to rejoin the crew without complications." As the suppressant coursed through their veins, Harris felt a subtle shift in his awareness of Gia. The constant hum of their connection dimmed slightly, becoming more manageable. They were issued specialized containment suits, sleek and form-fitting, designed to further limit their pheromone output. As Harris pulled on the suit, he caught Gia's eye. Even through the dampening effects of the suppressant, he could feel the pull between them, stronger than ever. Commander Blackwell met them as they exited quarantine, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "It's good to have you back," she said. "We're going to need your unique abilities for this mission." In the days that followed, Harris and Gia threw themselves into mission preparations. They led their specially selected team through grueling training exercises in the Thunderbolt's holodeck, pushing the limits of their enhanced abilities. During one particularly intense close-quarters combat simulation, Harris found himself pinned against a wall. Xia's body pressed against his as they fought off holographic enemies. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through him, their enhanced connection magnifying every sensation. "Focus!" Xia hissed, her breath hot against his ear, but he could feel her own struggle for control, the tremor in her muscles as she fought against the pull between them. As the Thunderbolt approached the coordinates of the suspected cosmic equilibrium outpost, tension aboard the ship reached a fever pitch. Long-range scans revealed a heavily fortified facility built into a massive asteroid, overflowing with defenses that incorporated both human and Orion technologies. In the final briefing before the mission, Commander Blackwell laid out their objectives. "Your primary goal is to infiltrate the facility and gather intelligence on something called Project Chimera," she said, her gaze fixed on Harris and Xia. "Whatever it is, we believe it's key to understanding the cosmic equilibrium's ultimate plans." As Harris donned his infiltration suit and checked his equipment one last time, he felt Xia's presence behind him. He turned to find her standing closer than was strictly necessary. "Whatever happens out there," she said, her voice low, "we face it together." Harris nodded, words unnecessary between them. As they boarded the stealth shuttle, prepared to launch towards the hidden outpost, he felt a surge of anticipation. Whatever changes they had undergone, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them head-on. The shuttle bay doors slid open, revealing the star-studded expanse of space. As the stealth shuttle detached from the Thunderbolt and accelerated towards the asteroid belt, Harris and Xia shared a final glance. Their mission was clear, but the future, their future, remained shrouded in uncertainty. As the shuttle accelerated towards its target, the vastness of space gave way to the looming asteroid field, a chaotic maze of rocky bodies spinning in the void. Harris's hands danced over the controls, guiding the craft through the treacherous terrain. Beside him, Xia monitored the sensor readings, her enhanced senses attuned to the slightest anomaly. "Multiple contacts ahead," she reported, her voice taut with concentration. "The outpost's defenses are active." Before Harris could respond, the shuttle rocked violently. Warning lights flashed across the console as energy projectiles slammed into their hull. "We've been detected," Harris called out, wrestling with the controls. The shuttle lurched to the side, narrowly avoiding a massive asteroid. "Hold on!" The team braced themselves as Harris executed a series of evasive maneuvers, pushing the craft beyond its design limits. The shuttle groaned under the strain, metal creaking as it weaved through the barrage of enemy fire. A particularly vicious hit sent them spinning. Xia's fingers flew over her console, rerouting power to stabilize their trajectory. "Left thrusters gone," she reported grimly. Harris gritted his teeth, scanning the asteroid's surface for any suitable landing zone. "We're going in hot," he announced. "Brace for impact." The shuttle skidded across the rocky terrain, sending up a shower of sparks and debris. Harris and Xia worked in perfect synchronization, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to guide the craft to a somewhat controlled crash. As the shuttle ground to a halt, the team quickly assessed their situation. The craft was a smoking ruin, but their specialized infiltration suits had protected them from serious harm. "Everyone out," Harris ordered, helping a dazed team member to their feet. "We need to move before they send a search party." Emerging from the wreckage, they found themselves on a desolate landscape of jagged rocks and deep shadows. The cosmic equilibrium outpost loomed in the distance, a fortress of metal and energy shields built into the heart of the asteroid. Shana scanned their surroundings, her Orion-enhanced senses picking up details invisible to human eyes. "There's a network of sensor beacons," she reported, "designed to detect movement." Harris nodded, his mind racing through potential strategies. "Can you guide us through?" Xia's eyes narrowed in concentration. "Yes, but it won't be easy." As they began their arduous trek across the asteroid's surface, Xia took point. Her movements were fluid and precise, guiding the team through invisible gaps in the detection grid. Harris watched her with a mix of admiration and concern, noting the sheen of sweat on her brow and the slight tremor in her hands. The effort of maintaining such intense focus was clearly taking its toll. As they neared a particularly dense cluster of sensor beacons, Xie stumbled slightly. Harris caught her arm, steadying her. "You okay?" he whispered, acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her skin even through their suits. Xia nodded, but her eyes were slightly unfocused. "The concentration, it's triggering some kind of reaction. My body temperature is rising." Harris felt a surge of concern, recognizing the signs of a mild heat-like state. The pheromone suppressants were clearly struggling to contain their altered physiology under stress. "We're almost there," he assured her, gesturing towards the outpost's outer perimeter. "Just a little further." As they approached the facility's walls, Harris spotted a maintenance airlock, partially hidden behind an outcropping of rock. "There," he pointed. "That's our way in." The team took up defensive positions while Harris and Xia worked on bypassing the airlock's security. Their complementary skills meshed seamlessly, Harris's technical expertise combining with Xia's intuitive understanding of Orion systems. As the airlock's locking mechanism finally yielded, Harris felt a surge of triumph. He turned to Xia, a grin spreading across his face, only to find her already looking at him. For a moment, the intensity of their connection overwhelmed him, the bond between them humming with shared adrenaline and something deeper, more primal. Shaking off the distraction, Harris led the team into the facility. The corridors were a maze of metal and pulsing energy conduits, the air thick with the scent of ozone and alien chemicals. "We split here," Harris announced, gesturing to the team. "You know your objectives. Rendezvous at the extraction point in 30 minutes. As the rest of the team moved off towards the power systems, Harris and Xia pressed on towards the central control room. The facility's layout was a confusing blend of human and Orion design philosophies, but their enhanced senses allowed them to navigate the twisting passages with surprising ease. Their progress was abruptly halted as they rounded a corner, coming face to face with a group of security personnel. The confined space erupted into chaos as both sides opened fire. Harris ducked behind a protruding conduit, energy blasts sizzling past his head. Beside him, Xia moved with fluid grace, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to dodge incoming fire with inhuman precision. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, adding another layer of complexity to the firefight. Harris found himself momentarily weightless before being slammed back to the ground, the rapid changes threatening to disorient him. A stray energy blast struck a nearby conduit, releasing a cloud of shimmering particles into the air. Harris felt his heart rate spike as he recognized the telltale signs of experimental pheromones. "Xia," he called out in warning, but it was too late. The concentrated dose overwhelmed their containment suits, flooding their systems with an intensified version of the hybrid pheromones they had been struggling to control. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Harris felt his senses sharpen to an almost painful degree. Every movement and sound amplified tenfold. But more than that, he felt an almost irresistible pull towards Xia. Their already strong connection, now a raging inferno of attraction and need. Fighting against the pheromone-induced haze, Harris forced himself to focus on the mission. With their physical capabilities dramatically enhanced by the exposure, he and Xia made short work of the remaining security forces. As the last enemy fell, Harris found himself face to face with Xia. Her eyes were wild, pupils dilated, and he could see the same struggle for control reflected in her expression. "We need to keep moving," Xia said, her voice husky and strained. Harris nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Together they pushed forward toward the central control room, each step a battle against their own bodies and the primal urges threatening to override their mission focus. As they approached their target, a familiar figure came into view. Dr. Zara, the Orion scientist who had eluded them on the Dreadnought, stood before the central console. Her appearance had changed dramatically, her body visibly altered by her own experiments. Dr. Zara's eyes widened in recognition and fear. She lunged for the console, her fingers reaching for what could only be a facility-wide alarm. In that moment, Harris and Xia moved as one. Their enhanced abilities, coupled with their perfect synchronization, allowed them to cross the room in the blink of an eye. Before Dr. Zara could sound the alarm, they had her subdued, her unconscious form slumping to the ground. The physical contact during the brief struggle sent shockwaves through Harris and Gia's pheromone-addled systems. They found themselves pressed close, breathing heavily, the line between professional boundaries and raw attraction blurring dangerously. With monumental effort, Harris tore himself away, focusing on the central computer. "We need to find out what Chimera is," he said, his voice rough. As they began to sift through the data, the true scope of the cosmic equilibrium's plans unfolded before them. Project Chimera was more than just a weapon or a tool. It was an attempt to create an entirely new species, combining the best traits of humans and Orions. "They're trying to create the ultimate soldiers," Zia whispered, her eyes scanning the horrifying details. "Potential rulers of both races." Before they could fully process the implications, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. The sabotage team had succeeded in their mission, plunging sections of the outpost into darkness and chaos. As Harris and Zia hurried to complete the data download, a new threat emerged. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, accompanied by the sound of metal tearing and screams of pain. They turned to see a towering figure enter the control room, a successful Chimera prototype. The being before them was a terrifying blend of human and Orion physiologies, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Harris and Gia shared a glance, their bond thrumming with shared commitment and a hint of fear. As the Chimera advanced, they prepared to face this embodiment of the cosmic equilibrium's ultimate weapon, knowing that the fate of their mission, and perhaps both their species, hung in the balance. Balance. The Chimera's eyes blazed with inhuman intelligence as it advanced, its massive form a grotesque fusion of human and Orion physiologies. Harris and Zia moved in perfect synchronization, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to dodge the Chimera's initial lunge. The creature's fist smashed into the console behind them, sending sparks flying. "We need to move," Harris shouted, grabbing the data drive containing the stolen intelligence. Zia nodded, her eyes never leaving the Chimera. "The others should have disabled the power systems by now. Let's go." They sprinted from the control room, the Chimera's roar echoing behind them. The corridor ahead was plunged into darkness, emergency lights casting eerie red shadows. Alarms blared, their piercing wail adding to the chaos. As they ran, the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. One moment they were bounding forward with enhanced strength, the next they were struggling against crushing pressure. Harris felt his stomach lurch as they rounded a corner, suddenly finding himself floating before slamming back to the floor. "This way," Zia called out, her Orion-enhanced senses guiding them through the maze-like facility. They rejoined the rest of their team at a junction, the group looking battered but determined. "Hangar Bay is our best bet," one of the operatives reported. "We've got experimental shuttles down there." A violent tremor shook the outpost, and the acrid smell of burning electronics filled the air. Exposed conduits sparked dangerously, forcing the team to duck and weave as they navigated the treacherous corridors. Harris found himself hyper-aware of Zia's presence beside him, the lingering effects of the pheromone exposure intensifying every shared glance and brush of contact. He could see the same struggle for focus mirrored in her eyes. They burst into the hangar bay, a cavernous space filled with sleek, alien-looking shuttles. "Marcus," Harris called into his communicator, "we need your help. How do we get one of these birds flying?" Chief Engineer Wong's voice crackled through the static. "I'm seeing the schematics now. It's a hybrid system, but I can talk you through it. Get to the nearest shuttle, and I'll guide you." Harris and Gia raced to the closest vessel, their hands flying over unfamiliar controls. The rest of the team provided covering fire as security forces poured into the hangar. "Reroute the power from the auxiliary matrix," Marcus instructed. "You should see a series of blue conduits to your left." Sia's fingers danced across the panel, her intuitive grasp of Orion technology complementing Harris's technical expertise. The shuttle hummed to life, its systems responding to their touch. A deafening crash announced the Chimera's arrival, the hybrid being tore through the hangar's blast doors, shrugging off weapons fire as if it were nothing more than an irritation. "Everyone, get on board now," Harris shouted, his hands gripping the shuttle's controls. The team scrambled into the vessel as Harris fired up the engines. The Chimera charged forward, its massive form eating up the distance between them. Suddenly, the hangar bay began to depressurize. Warning klaxons blared as atmosphere vented into space. The rapid change in air pressure disrupted the lingering pheromone cloud, momentarily clearing Harris and Gia's minds. In that instant of clarity, they locked eyes, a wordless plan forming between them. As the Chimera leaped toward the shuttle, they moved in perfect tandem. Gia activated the vessel's shield system while Harris fired the maneuvering thrusters. The shuttle lurched sideways, narrowly avoiding the Chimera's grasp. The hybrid being's momentum carried it past them, directly into the path of the departing atmosphere. For a moment, the creature was suspended in the vortex of escaping air. Harris didn't hesitate. He fired the shuttle's main engines, the powerful thrust catching the Chimera and hurling it back into the disintegrating hangar bay. The shuttle shot out of the bay, alarms screaming as Harris pushed the experimental craft to its limits. Energy beams from the outpost's remaining defenses crisscrossed space around them, but the vessel's hybrid technology responded beautifully to Harris's enhanced reflexes. "We've got incoming," she warned, her eyes on the sensor readouts. "Cosmic equilibrium ships closing fast." Harris opened a channel to the Thunderbolt. "Commander, we're outbound with the package, but we've got company. Request immediate extraction." Commander Blackwell's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Understood. We're engaged with hostiles but moving to your position. Stand by for retrieval." The stolen shuttle bucked and weaved through a barrage of weapons fire. Harris's hands flew over the controls, coaxing impossible maneuvers from the craft. Beside him, Zia managed the shield systems, her actions perfectly complementing his piloting. Through the shuttle's view screen, they saw the Thunderbolt appear, its massive form cutting through a swarm of enemy vessels. The larger ship executed a series of daring evasive maneuvers, creating a momentary gap in the firefight. "This is our window," Harris announced. "Hold on tight." He pushed the shuttle's engines beyond their limits, aiming for the Thunderbolt's open docking bay. The smaller vessel shuddered under the strain, warning lights flashing across every console. Time seemed to slow as they approached the Thunderbolt. Harris could feel the vibrations of the overtaxed engines, smell the acrid scent of burning circuits. His enhanced senses took in every detail: the play of light on the Thunderbolt's hull, the minute adjustments in the larger ship's position, the tightening of Zia's grip on her seat. With a bone-jarring impact, the shuttle skidded into the Thunderbolt's docking bay. Emergency systems deployed, magnetic clamps securing the vessel as the bay doors slammed shut. Harris exhaled, the tension of the last few minutes catching up with him. He turned to Xia, a weary smile on his face, only to freeze at the sight of an unfamiliar figure crouched in the shuttle's rear compartment. "Don't shoot," the stranger called out, raising her hands. "I'm Dr. Lyra. I defected from the cosmic equilibrium. I can help you understand the Chimera project." Before anyone could respond, Commander Blackwell's voice rang through the shuttle's comm system. "All hands, brace for emergency jump. We're withdrawing from the combat zone." The Thunderbolt's powerful engines roared to life, catapulting the ship away from the asteroid field and the pursuing cosmic equilibrium forces. As the stars blurred into streaks of light outside the viewports, Harris felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The adrenaline of their escape began to fade, leaving him acutely aware of the lingering effects of the pheromone exposure. He glanced at Xia, seeing his own fatigue and disorientation mirrored in her eyes. As the Thunderbolt raced towards safety, carrying its cargo of hard-won intelligence and unexpected defectors, Harris knew their ordeal was nowhere near the end. The true challenge, understanding and countering the Chimera threat, was only just beginning. The true challenge, understanding and countering the Chimera threat, was only just starting to unfold. As the Thunderbolt raced through hyperspace, Harris and Xia were rushed to the medical bay. Dr. Skora and his team worked tirelessly to stabilize their condition, administering a cocktail of drugs to counteract the effects of the intense pheromone exposure. Days blurred together as Harris drifted in and out of consciousness. His dreams were vivid and chaotic, filled with fragmented images of cosmic equilibrium facilities and half-formed plans. Each time he woke, Xia was there in the adjacent bed, her presence a constant anchor in the storm of his thoughts. "They're stabilizing," Dr. Stor reported to Commander Blackwell, his voice low. But the pheromone exposure has altered their brain chemistry in ways we're still trying to understand. They're connected somehow. Blackwell frowned, studying the medical readouts. Connected how? Their brainwave patterns are synchronizing during REM sleep, Stor explained, and the information they're processing, it's beyond what they could have consciously observed during the mission. As Harris and Zia recovered, their shared dreams became more coherent. They found themselves walking through cosmic equilibrium, bases they'd never seen, overhearing conversations about future operations and secret projects. We need to find a way to extract this information safely, Blackwell decided. Their intel could be crucial for the emergency summit. Dr. Stor and his team worked around the clock, developing a method to interpret and record the intelligence gleaned from Harris and Shia's shared dreamscape. As the Thunderbolt approached the neutral space station, the two agents were fitted with modified containment suits to manage their lingering pheromone production. The space station loomed before them, a massive structure of interlocking rings and sprawling docking arms. As the Thunderbolt maneuvered into its assigned berth, Harris and Zia joined Commander Blackwell and the rest of the delegation. Remember, Blackwell instructed as they moved through the airlock, stick to the facts. We need these people to understand the gravity of the situation without causing a panic. The summit chamber was a cavernous space, its high ceiling adorned with holographic displays showing the status of various systems and the positions of ships in the surrounding space. Representatives from both human and Orion leadership filled the tiered seating, their low murmurs creating a constant undercurrent of tension. As Harris and Zia took their places at the podium, a striking Orion female caught their attention. Her scales shimmered with an iridescent quality that marked her as a high-ranking official. Ambassador Thala, Blackwell whispered, noticing their gaze. She's been pushing for closer human-Orion cooperation. Could be an ally. The briefing began, with Harris and Shia recounting their experiences at the Cosmic Equilibrium Outpost. As they spoke, the chamber's holographic systems projected images and data from their mission, bringing the horror of the Chimera project into stark relief. Ambassador Thala leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the human-Orion pair. When they finished their report, she stood, her voice carrying across the chamber. What we've seen here is both terrifying and intriguing, she began. These two have demonstrated abilities beyond what either of our species is capable of alone. I propose we consider a joint human-Orion task force, using their enhanced abilities as a template for future operatives. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, some supportive, others outraged at the suggestion. Harris and Zia exchanged a glance, their heightened connection allowing them to sense each other's unease at being the center of such attention. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. The holographic displays flickered, showing a small fleet of unmarked ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel nearby. Cosmic equilibrium, Harris breathed, his enhanced senses picking up details on the display that others missed. Chaos erupted as evacuation protocols were initiated. Harris and Zia, acting on instinct, moved to take charge of the situation. Commander, Harris called out, we need to coordinate a defensive response. These people are our priority. Blackwell nodded, already issuing orders to the Thunderbolt and station security. Do what you need to do. As Harris and Zia began organizing the evacuation, the station shuddered violently. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, creating pockets of zero gravity throughout the structure. This way, Zia shouted, guiding a group of diplomats towards a secure area. She pushed off from a wall, using her enhanced strength to propel herself through a zero-G zone, pulling others to safety. Harris moved in perfect synchronization, covering their retreat as the first wave of cosmic equilibrium forces breached the station's outer defenses. The invaders were unlike anything they'd faced before, hybrid soldiers with abilities that surpassed even their own. As Harris engaged one of the hybrids in close-quarters combat, he felt a surge of strength and awareness. Zia's consciousness brushed against his, their shared bond allowing them to coordinate their movements with uncanny precision. The battle raged across the station, with Harris and Shia at its center. They moved from section to section, protecting key personnel and holding off the advancing hybrid soldiers. Their actions drew admiring glances from both human and Orion military leaders present at the summit. In the midst of the chaos, Dr. Lyra's voice crackled over the comms. I have a plan to neutralize the hybrids, but it's risky. I need to flood certain sections with a gaseous compound. It should incapacitate them, but it could affect Harris and Jia as well. Commander Blackwell hesitated for a moment before giving the go-ahead. Do it. Harris, Jia. Be ready to pull back if necessary. As the compound began to spread through the station's ventilation system, Harris and Jia found themselves facing a new challenge. Their altered physiology reacted to the gas in unexpected ways, enhancing their strength and speed, but also intensifying the connection between them. We need to get to the East Wing, Jia gasped, her voice strained. There's a group of delegates trapped there. Harris nodded, fighting to maintain his focus as waves of sensation washed over him. Together, they pushed through sections of the station affected by the compound. Their movements a complex dance of combat efficiency and barely suppressed attraction. As they approached the trapped delegates, a squad of hybrid soldiers blocked their path. Harris and Jia moved as one, their enhanced abilities allowing them to anticipate and counter the hybrids' every move. The delegates watched in awe as the human Orion pair carved a path through their seemingly unstoppable opponents. With the delegates secured, Harris and Jia led the group back through the station's twisting corridors. Their bodies were pushed to the limit, the compound's effects growing stronger with each passing moment. As they reached the secure zone, Ambassador Thela approached them, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. What you've done here today, it changes everything. We need more like you if we're to have any hope against the cosmic equilibrium. Harris opened his mouth to respond, but a fresh wave of sensation overwhelmed him. He stumbled, caught by Jia's steady hand. As their eyes met, the world around them seemed to fade away, the intensity of their connection drowning out everything else. The battle for the station raged on, but for Harris and Jia, a new and equally challenging fight was just beginning. The struggle to understand and control the bond that now defined them, and to navigate the complex future that lay ahead as prototypes for a new kind of hybrid soldiers capable of matching their enhanced abilities. As the chaos subsided and the immediate threat was neutralized, Harris and Jia found themselves at the center of intense scrutiny. The delegates, still shaken from the attack, watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation as the pair was escorted to a secure debriefing area. Commander Blackwell's voice crackled over the comm system. Harris, Jia, report to the Thunderbolt's medical bay immediately. Dr. Skora needs to run some tests. The walk back to the ship was a blur of activity. Security teams rushed to fortify the station's defenses, while medical personnel tended to the injured. Harris and Jia moved through it all in a daze, their heightened senses overwhelmed by the aftermath of battle and the lingering effects of the compound. Aboard the Thunderbolt, Dr. Skora and his team were waiting, their faces a mix of concern and scientific curiosity. As soon as the airlock sealed behind them, Harris and Jia were ushered into a specially prepared quarantine area. We need to monitor your condition closely, Dr. Skora explained, his eyes darting between holographic readouts. The compound's interaction with your hybrid physiology is unprecedented. Over the next few hours, Harris and Jia underwent a battery of tests. Blood samples were taken, brain activity monitored, and physical responses measured. Through it all, they remained acutely aware of each other's presence, their bond seeming to strengthen with each passing moment. As Dr. Skora reviewed the results, Commander Blackwell entered the medical bay. His face was grim, the weight of recent events evident in the set of his shoulders. We're escorting the summit attendees back to their territories, he announced. The attack has accelerated plans for the Joint Human-Orion Task Force. You two are at the center of it all. Before Harris or Jia could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Warning klaxons blared as the Thunderbolt systems flickered and dimmed. Spatial anomaly detected! Chief Engineer Wong's voice rang out over the comm. All hands, brace for impact. The ship lurched, artificial gravity failing momentarily. In the medical bay, equipment crashed to the floor as the staff struggled to maintain their footing. Harris instinctively reached out, catching Xie as she was thrown off balance. The moment their skin made contact, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them. As quickly as it began, the turbulence subsided, but the damage was done. In the quarantine area, warning lights flashed on the control panel. "Containment breach!" Dr. Skora shouted, his eyes wide with alarm. "The anomaly disrupted the isolation field. Pheromone levels are spiking." Harris felt it immediately. A rush of heat, his senses sharpening to an almost painful degree. Beside him, Xia gasped, her scales shimmering with an intense iridescence. "We need to move them to a more secure location," Commander Blackwell ordered, his voice muffled by the emergency breathing apparatus he'd donned. "The pheromones are affecting the crew." As they were hurried through the corridors, Harris and Xia saw the impact of their condition firsthand. Crew members they passed staggered, eyes glazing over as they were hit by waves of pheromones. Dr. Skora and his team worked feverishly, administering a hastily prepared suppressant to those most affected. They reached a reinforced section of the ship, originally designed for containing hazardous materials. As the heavy doors sealed behind them, Harris and Xia found themselves alone, their ragged breathing the only sound in the confined space. "Harris," Xia's voice was strained, "I can feel everything. It's too much." He nodded, understanding perfectly. Every nerve ending felt like it was on fire, his muscles coiled with impossibly strong energy. The bond between them pulsed, stronger than ever. Before they could process their situation further, another violent tremor rocked the ship. The lights flickered, plunging them into momentary darkness. When emergency power kicked in, they found themselves floating, the artificial gravity offline. Years of training kicked in. Using their enhanced strength and reflexes, Harris and Xia maneuvered through the zero-gravity environment with practiced ease. They made their way to a communications panel, establishing contact with the bridge. "Commander," Harris called out, fighting to keep his voice steady. "What's our status?" Blackwell's response was grim. "We're under attack. Cosmic equilibrium vessel. They must have followed us from the station. Our propulsion systems are damaged. We're sitting ducks out here." Shenna's eyes met Harris's, a silent understanding passing between them. "We can help," she said, her voice filled with tenacity. "Negative," Blackwell replied. "Your condition is too unstable. We can't risk—" His words were cut off by the sound of tearing metal. Warning klaxons blared anew as Harris and Xia felt the telltale shift in air pressure that signaled a hull breach. "They're boarding us!" Blackwell's voice was urgent. "All security teams, repel boarders." Harris and Xia exchanged a look. Without a word, they moved in unison toward the door of their containment area. Their bodies hummed with energy, senses hyper-alert. "We're coming out," Harris announced over the comm. "You need us in this fight." There was a moment of hesitation before Blackwell's response came. "Understood, but take precautions. Dr. Skora is sending protective gear to your location." Moments later, the containment doors slid open. A crew member, already showing signs of pheromone exposure, thrust 2 sealed packages at them before stumbling away. Inside, they found sleek combat suits designed to regulate their output and enhance their abilities. As they donned the suits, Harris and Xia felt an immediate change. The overwhelming sensations dampened, allowing them to focus. But the connection between them remained strong, a constant undercurrent of awareness. "Ready?" Harris asked, checking the seal on Xia's helmet. She nodded, her eyes gleaming with a mix of anticipation and something deeper, unspoken. "Let's show these cosmic equilibrium bastards what we can do." With that, they plunged into the fray, moving as one towards the sounds of battle echoing through the Thunderbolt's corridors. The ship's future hung in the balance, and they were the wild card no one had anticipated. Not even themselves. The ship's future hung in the balance, and they were the wild card no one had anticipated, not even themselves. As they raced through the corridors, Harris and Xia encountered pockets of resistance. Cosmic equilibrium forces had breached multiple sections of the ship, their hybrid soldiers engaging in fierce firefights with the Thunderbolt's security teams. The pair moved with fluid precision, their enhanced abilities allowing them to turn the tide of each skirmish they encountered. "Engineering deck now," Commander Blackwell's voice crackled over the comm system. "They're attempting to sabotage our propulsion systems." Without hesitation, Harris and Xia altered their course, descending through access shafts and emergency corridors to reach the heart of the ship. As they neared engineering, the sounds of battle intensified. They emerged into a scene of chaos. Consoles sparked and smoked, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning circuitry. Chief Engineer Wong was cornered by 3 hybrid soldiers, her team desperately trying to hold off the attackers while maintaining critical systems. Harris and Xi sprang into action, their movements a blur of synchronized violence. Within moments, the hybrid soldiers lay unconscious, and the engineering team stared at their saviors in awe. "Thank you," Wong gasped, wiping sweat from her brow. "But we're not out of danger yet. They've planted some kind of device on our main power core. If we don't disable it..." A violent tremor shook the ship, cutting off her words. Warning klaxons blared as systems throughout the Thunderbolt began to fail. "We're on it," Xia assured her, already moving towards the power core with Harris close behind. The device was unlike anything they'd seen before, a pulsing, organic-looking mass fused to the ship's systems. As they approached, it seemed to react to their presence, tendrils of energy lashing out. "Cover me," Harris said, his voice tight with concentration. He began to work on disabling the device, his enhanced senses allowing him to perceive its intricate workings. Xia took up a defensive position, her reflexes tested as wave after wave of hybrid soldiers poured into engineering. She moved with deadly grace, each strike precise and devastating. The bond between her and Harris hummed with energy, allowing her to anticipate threats even as she focused on the immediate battle. Just as Harris made progress on the device, a massive explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, broken only by emergency lighting and the eerie glow of the alien device. "Hull breach in Section 7, Blackwell's voice came through, strained and urgent. "All hands, prepare for emergency protocols." In that moment of distraction, a hybrid soldier broke through Xia's defenses, lunging for Harris. Time seemed to slow as Xia reacted, her body moving faster than thought. She intercepted the attack, but not before the hybrid's claws raked across her containment suit, tearing through the material. The effect was immediate. Xia's pheromones, no longer suppressed, flooded the area. The hybrid soldiers still standing staggered, their coordinated assault faltering as they were overwhelmed by the potent chemical cocktail. Harris, sensing the change through their bond, redoubled his efforts on the device. With a final, decisive move, he severed its connection to the ship's systems. The alien mass pulsed once, twice, then went dark. As systems throughout the ship began to stabilize, Harris turned to find Xia surrounded by incapacitated hybrid soldiers. Her scales shimmered with an intense iridescence, and her eyes met his with a look of both triumph and barely suppressed desire. "We did it," she breathed, her voice husky. Before they could process the implications of their victory or Xia's compromised suit, Commander Blackwell's voice came through once more. "All security teams, report to the bridge immediately. We've received a priority transmission from Central Command." Harris and Xia exchanged a look, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. As they made their way to the bridge, crew members they passed reacted visibly to Xia's unleashed pheromones, a mix of awe and instinctive response clear on their faces. They arrived on the bridge to find Blackwell engaged in an intense discussion with a holographic projection of Admiral Chen, the head of the Joint Human-Orion Task Force. "Ah, good, you're here," Blackwell said, turning to face them. His expression was grim but determined. "In light of recent events, your orders have changed. You're to report immediately to a classified facility for specialized training and assessment." "Sir?" Harris questioned, confusion evident in his voice. Admiral Chen's hologram flickered as he spoke. The attack on the summit and this ship were not isolated incidents. The cosmic equilibrium is mounting a major offensive, and we need every advantage we can get. You two represent our best hope for developing effective countermeasures against their hybrid forces." Xia stepped forward, her voice steady despite the visible effect her pheromones were having on the bridge crew. "We're ready to do whatever it takes, Admiral." Chen nodded approvingly. "Good. A stealth transport is en route to your position now. You'll be taken to a joint human-Orion base hidden within an asteroid belt. There you'll undergo intensive training to hone your unique abilities. As if on cue, the ship's sensors detected an approaching vessel, its stealth technology so advanced that it had been virtually undetectable until it was almost upon them. "It's time," Blackwell said, his voice softening slightly. "Good luck, both of you. The fate of our alliance may well rest on your shoulders." As Harris and Zia prepared to board the transport, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were about to embark on a journey that would push them to their limits, testing not only their enhanced abilities, but also the bond that had formed between them. The challenges ahead were daunting, but as they looked at each other, a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The airlock sealed behind them as they stepped onto the stealth transport. As the ship pulled away from the Thunderbolt, Harris and Zia watched through a viewport as their former home grew smaller, disappearing into the vastness of space. Their new life, full of unknowns and fraught with danger, was about to begin.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.